This story starts in a school, where we find a girl lost in thought about her brother. Her moment of contemplation is suddenly interrupted when another girl bursts into the classroom, frantically calling for everyone's attention. She excitedly announces that she's just seen the cutest guy in the office. Apparently, he's a new transfer student and a third year. As soon as the girl from before hears this, she realizes it must be her brother. Before we dive deeper into the story, the girl narrates that her brother was thought to have died in a plane crash with their parents, but miraculously, he returned after 10 long years. When she saw her brother for the first time, she could hardly believe her eyes. Their grandpa had the same reaction upon seeing him alive. When her brother looked at her, she was startled, but he just smiled in response and asked if she was his sister Daeon. Suddenly, Daeon is yanked out of her flashback by a bunch of girls trying to bully her. These troublemakers demand that she hand over the gym uniform she's brought with her. Daeon tries to reason with them, pointing out that if she gives up her uniform, she won't have anything to wear. Blondezilla just snickers at this and then starts yelling at her. She's so loud that even the other girls in the classroom can't ignore the commotion she's causing for no good reason. Blondezilla finally crosses the line and smacks Daeon on the head, making it clear that she better hand over the uniform, or else she won't be nice to her anymore. While I wouldn't exactly call slapping someone on the head being nice, I guess no one is about to argue with this over-the-top Blondezilla. Even the other girls in the classroom just look away, not wanting to get involved or stop her from getting all high and mighty. It looks like Daeon has no choice but to face the humiliation and silently comply with the demand. The next scene takes us to third-year class 2, where the entire class is being introduced to this new handsome fella, who has just transferred into this school. The teacher mentions that he's been living overseas for a long time and asks everyone to be friendly and help him settle in. All the girls in the class can't help but blush at how hot he is. Even the bullies in the room can't resist sneering, while the other students with average looks feel a pang of jealousy at the new guy's good looks. The teacher directs him to an empty seat at the back of the room, and he makes his way over, ready to get settled in his new spot. As the new guy walks to his seat, we spot a redhead guy named Jae-hyung, and we can tell that he is feeling absolutely annoyed. Let's face it, he's just jealous that this new guy is stealing the spotlight with his looks. The big guy seated behind Jae-hyung gives a subtle signal. Jae-hyung quickly catches on to what his friend is trying to say and decides to take action. He extends his foot out, aiming to trip the new guy as he walks by. But Jae-hyung's plan doesn't go as smoothly as he'd hoped, because this new guy quickly halts, leaving Jae-hyung gritting his teeth in frustration. He had timed his foot extension perfectly, but it still didn't work at all. Meanwhile, the new guy, who goes by the name Jin by the way, just gives Jae-hyung a death glare for his pathetic attempt, though he does not say a word. The scene then flashes back to Jin's past, where we see a blonde guy advising Jin to avoid getting into fights once he returns to Korea. Jin lets out a sigh and responds that he's already aware of this much. The senior perks up to hear this, and curiously asks about how Jin knows. Jin then explains that he wouldn't enter any combat situation without having enough intel about his surroundings. Well, it looks like Jin's response isn't exactly what the senior was expecting to hear, because it sounds way too hardcore. But Jin continues, sharing his wisdom from years of experience. He explains that making a rash decision could cost him his life, and such a mistake would be a rookie move. This makes the senior even more uncomfortable. And our boy goes on to remind his senior that he has survived plenty of battlefields over the past 10 years, because he knows his stuff. Suddenly, Major Kang, the senior, tells Jin to stop and clarifies that he wasn't referring to all this strategic nonsense, but rather, he does not want our boy to engage in fights because he wants to prevent the poor offender from getting beaten up badly. In the present moment, Major's advice lingers in our boy's mind, so he does not say anything to the bully in order to avoid fighting. The teacher then notices Jin standing there idly and asks if everything's okay. Jin simply flashes a pleasant smile, saying he is good, and continues past Jae-hyung, ignoring him. Jae-hyung snickers once again, thinking Jin is just a wimp afraid of getting picked on. Even the guy who tried to trip him earlier smiles, pleased with Jin's reaction. Once Jin reaches his seat, the teacher tells one of the students to help him get ready for the first class. With that, the teacher leaves after wishing Jin a good time studying. The student sitting next to Jin quickly introduces himself as Youngchan Park, and our boy returns the gesture, introducing himself as Ijin Yu. Youngchan then nervously glances over his shoulder to make sure no one's watching, and leans in to whisper to our boy that he saw what Jae-hyung was trying to do. He explains that Jae-hyung Lee is a troublemaker, but there's also another bully to watch out for, which is Hyokjin Ju, who's just as bad. Jin takes a closer look at both of the troublemakers, while Youngchan further reveals that the next class is math. Jin thanks his new friend for the heads up, and Youngchan is relieved to see that our boy isn't just another bully. He tells our boy to feel free to ask him anything, and he'll do his best to help out. The math teacher arrives and instructs everyone to open their textbooks. He starts solving math problems on the board. Some students are busy taking notes, while others look utterly bored. Jin takes in the scene, noticing that Young-chan is diligently paying attention, while some students are dozing off or messing around on their smartphones. He also glances out the window and sees a group of students playing in the playground. Jin's mind drifts back to his days as a mercenary. He remembers the heavy rain, feeling utterly exhausted and battered. The chaos of his past life, the constant roar of guns and explosions, seems to have left a permanent mark on his mind. Yet, in the present moment, as he closes his eyes, there's no unpleasant noise. Everything feels unexpectedly peaceful and serene. As dawn approaches, students start heading home. Among them is Dayan, who spots her brother standing nearby. She's momentarily startled and asks if he's been waiting for her. He replies that yes, he was hoping to walk her home. However, he adds that if she has other plans, she's welcome to go on her own. Dayan quickly glances around and insists she has no other plans, but we can tell that she is still really anxious about walking with our boy. Jin then states that if she doesn't have anything pressing, they'll walk home together. Eventually, the girl agrees. Later on the street, the siblings walk side by side, both clearly feeling awkward. Jin tries to break the ice, and asks if she's feeling awkward too. Dayan is startled to hear this, and quickly insists she's not awkward at all. But Jin reassures her that it's okay, as he's feeling pretty awkward himself. Thankfully, this remark finally makes our girl relaxed a bit. Jin then reveals that he was only 9 at the time of the accident, so he doesn't remember much about his remaining family, including his sister. He points out that it must be pretty strange for her too, since she was only 7 and probably doesn't remember much either. Dayan stays silent, because this is in fact true. Just then, she suddenly hears some familiar voices around the corner, and her feet suddenly come to a halt. When Dayan looks at the source of the voice, she spots one of the girls who bullied her in class. She is apparently the friend of that blonde girl who slapped Dayan in the school today. The bully girl immediately notices Dayan and calls her out. Dayan breaks into a sweat, feeling uncertain about how she is going to handle the situation. One of the guys sitting with the bully girl asks who Dayan is. The bully girl reveals that Dayan is the girl Huijin dislikes, and Huijin is the same blonde girl who slapped her earlier. The bully girl also spots her brother walking along with Dayan and starts teasing her, asking if she's out with her boyfriend. She adds some colorful remarks, saying she didn't know bitches could date as well. Our girl quickly gets timid, and frantically tries to reassure her that Jin is just her brother. Well, this comes as a surprise to the bully girl, who didn't know Dayan had a brother. After hearing the rude comments, Jin asks Dayan if this girl is a friend of hers. Dayan timidly agrees, and admits they know each other from their homeroom. But the cocky girl doesn't let up, calling Dayan a bitch again and asks since when they became friends. Dayan trembles as the bully continues her rant. Jin then gives the girl a cold stare, one that's enough to freeze the hell itself. The guy sitting next to the bully girl doesn't appreciate Jin's sharp glare. He gets annoyed and warns Jin to watch himself if he doesn't want to get his ass yanked. Jin continues to glare, which only annoys the fatty more. The bully girl starts egging him on and provokes him to pick a fight with Jin. Eventually, the fatty's patience wears thin and he strides over to our boy, and Jin quickly shoves Dayan back and gets face to face with this stupid head. The fatty demands to know if Jin is trying to act tough in front of his sister. Jin notices how defenseless the fatty is, standing so close that all his vital points are wide open for attack. What's even more amusing is that the fatty isn't carrying any weapons. All he has is this giant ass of his. Jin can't help but feel that this guy is being rash and leaving himself wide open. But then, Major Kang's words echo in his mind once again, which reminds him to not pick fights with anyone. Jin lets out a sigh, averts his gaze, and decides to walk away quietly. But Fatty isn't letting Jin off the hook so easily. He grabs Jin by the collar and raises his hand, ready to deliver a sharp slap to Jin's face. Before he can make contact, Dayan rushes to intervene. She quickly bows down her head and explains to the bully that Jin has been living overseas for most of his life and isn't used to the way things work in Korea. On the other hand, the bully girl snickers to see her begging, while Dayan continues to tremble with fear. The fatty, however, snaps at Dayan, saying he doesn't care if Jin was living overseas or not. Seeing his sister so terrified and shaking in fear boils Jin's blood. Fueled by anger, he grabs Fatty's wrist and yanks it. Fatty squirms in pain, even though Jin hasn't done anything particularly aggressive. Jin throws his bag down and takes off his school coat. Calmly, he tells his sister to wait for him and covers her face with the coat, assuring her it won't take more than a minute. Just then, the rowdy thug charges at him from behind. Jin effortlessly twirls around and delivers a solid slap to the thug's face. The single slap sends the thug staggering, blood spilling from his mouth as he stumbles backward and crashes to the ground like a sack of potatoes. The cocky girl and the other goon feel a chill run down their spines, and I can tell they are about to crap their pants if our boy continues like this. Meanwhile, Jin lets out a sigh of disappointment, knowing he's broken his promise to Major Kang. But I guess this is not his fault entirely, as this fatty bastard had this coming. The other goon is so terrified that he has started to reconsider making any move against our boy. The next scene takes us to the countryside, where military soldiers are training tirelessly. Among them is Major Kang, overseeing the rigorous exercises. A fellow soldier approaches from behind and reminds Kang that today is Jin's first day at school. Hearing this, Major Kang gets concerned that despite 6 months of lessons on leading a normal life, Jin might struggle to adapt to his normal school life after so many years as a mercenary. But still, Kang feels a sense of pride, and he's confident that the lessons he imparted to Jin will help him thrive in his new life. Well, it turns out Major Kang's teachings didn't quite do the trick, because Jin is making these bullies look like yesterday's trash. The other bullies watch in shock as the injured fatty lies unconscious, eyes rolled back. The bully girl and her sidekick are shaking with fear as Jin strides toward them. In a flash, Jin lunges and lands a devastating punch right in the gut of the other thug, sending him flying and crashing to the ground. The cocky girl's jaw drops in disbelief. When Jin turns his attention to her, his death glare makes her tremble with fear. Daeon pulls the coat off her face, her hands trembling as she takes in the sight of the two thugs down for the count. Even though it's only been a minute since she was covered, Jin notices his sister watching him and, after giving the cocky girl one last intimidating look, he walks away from her. He turns to Daeon and apologizes for covering her face so abruptly. The apology only makes Daeon feel more awkward, so Jin tries to lighten the mood by suggesting they grab some snacks from her favorite store. Daeon stammers that it's okay and they don't need to, so Jin decides they should just head home. As Daeon and Jin cozy up, the bully girl is left terrified to see this. She's completely blown away by how this guy who was so terrifying with just a glare is now acting like a sweet, caring brother. As the siblings walk off together, Daeon gives her one last friendly wave before they head out, leaving the bully girl standing there, face frozen in terror. As they walk home, Daeon asks Jin if he was the one who knocked out those two guys earlier. Jin confirms it, and this only makes her curious about her brother, since he doesn't seem like the type to pick fights. She then explains that in Korea, staring at people like he did can be considered rude and might lead to uncomfortable situations. Jin agrees, adding that meeting someone's gaze can be risky depending on who you're staring at, which is similar to where he's from. Confused, Daeon asks why he stared at those thugs earlier. Jin simply replies that he noticed she was scared and he wanted to protect his sister. Daeon is startled by these unexpected responses, and she simply bows her head down while blushing. An awkward silence falls between them as they continue walking. It looks like Daeon will need to get used to having a caring brother around to look out for her. When they get back to the apartment, we see Grandpa is a bundle of nerves. He frantically tells Jin to just chill and enjoy some fruit, but our boy insists on taking care of the dishes himself. Grandpa's not sure how to handle this, so he eventually lets Jin take over. As Jin washes up the dishes with a steady hand, Grandpa asks if the dinner was okay, admitting he's not exactly a master chef. Jin, keeping it casual, tells Grandpa not to sweat it. He says the food has been great and he's loved every meal. The old man looks visibly relieved to hear that Jin enjoyed the food. You can even see the glimmer of satisfaction on his face. Grandpa then turns to Daeon, asking if she liked the food as well. She nods and agrees. Next, Grandpa shifts gears and asks Jin about his first day of school, and he is curious to know if anything interesting happened. Jin hesitates for a moment, looking a bit anxious about answering. Daeon also feels a bit uneasy, reflecting on how eventful the day has been. But after a moment of pause, Jin admits that it was a good day. Grandpa's face lights up with genuine pleasure at hearing this, clearly relieved and happy. Once everyone hits the bed for the night, we find our guy still wide awake. His mind flashes back to when his grandpa first saw him, and he can almost feel how grateful his old man was to have him around. Jin's cold heart has slowly started to warm up after living with his grandpa and sister for a while. Then, his thoughts drift to the time he was stuck on that airplane before it crashed. Passengers were in a panic, and the emergency oxygen masks had popped out of the compartments. As everyone scrambled to put on their masks, Jin's parents focused on making sure their son could breathe safely. It was a terrifying day for him. Just as the plane began its downward plunge, Jin jolts awake in the present, leaping out of bed in shock and breathing heavily from this nightmare. His heart is racing, and he finally realizes it was just a dream. He glances at his clock and sees that morning has arrived. As he sits there alone, he hears rattling noises coming from the living room. He stands up and goes out, only to find his sister preparing breakfast for the day. He looks around and asks where Grandpa went. She tells him that Grandpa left for work at dawn. She explains that Grandpa took time off to be home when Jin arrived, but now his paid holidays are over, so he's back to work. She also puts on her uniform, and once she's done, she decides to leave for the day. She tells Jin that breakfast is laid out on the table and reminds him to make sure he eats. With that, she heads out, and Jin glances back at the spread of food left for him. Back at school, we see the same bully girl and the blonde girl, Huijin. It turns out Huijin has discovered that the transfer student from yesterday is Dion's brother. The bully girl anxiously confirms this. Her mind flashes back to their previous encounter with Jin, and she feels devastated remembering how he knocked out 2 of her friends with just 1 punch. Huijin tries to ask why the bully girl is so scared, but the bully girl remains frozen in fear, unable to speak. I have grown tired of calling her a bully girl, so let's just give her an appropriate name, and let's call her Chicken Shake from this point onward. Huijin continues to press Chicken Shake about what happened. Finally, Chicken Shake swallows her fear and says they should stop picking on Daeon from now on. The glare Jin gave her is still burned into her mind and she can't shake it off. Despite her fear, she tries to reassure herself that everything will be fine because Huijin and her brother are basically the top dogs, and everyone at school bows down to them. After a while, we see Daeon again. As usual, she gets brutally smacked on the head. When she turns around, she sees Huijin and Chicken Shake together, once again there to bully her. Daeon quickly asks what they both want now, to which Huijin tells her to come with her for a second. Our girl asks where they are going. The cocky blonde is clearly ticked off and snaps at Daeon, telling her not to get too big for her boots and to follow orders if she doesn't want to get beaten down. She adds that having a brother isn't going to change a thing. A little while later, we find ourselves at the school's recycling station, where Daeon is getting absolutely pummeled by the cocky blonde. After a few solid kicks, the blonde tells Daeon to keep her head down. Daeon, trying to catch her breath, asks why she's getting beaten up in the first place. That's when Huijin reminds her about her brother. She tells Daeon that her brother doesn't have to act like a tough guy and warns her to explain to her brother to stop getting so full of himself. She further makes it clear that they won't be responsible for Daeon's brother anymore because he's in for one hell of a ride. Daeon, still clueless, asks if that means they're targeting her brother from now on. Huijin quickly confirms, reminding her that the 2 bullies our boy took down were friends of her brother. Since Daeon and her brother dared to mess with them, they're not going to get off easy. It's like poking a lion and expecting not to get mauled. Daeon's face goes absolutely pale upon hearing this. She yells at the 2 thugs, demanding to know what they're planning to do with her brother. But all she gets in response is a solid slap across the face for speaking out of turn. The slap leaves a bruise on her cheek, but the sting of the physical pain is nothing compared to the ache she feels knowing her brother is in serious trouble. Daeon clenches her jaw, steels herself, and bolts out of the recycling station, leaving the 2 thug women behind. The scene cuts back to 3rd year class 2. The atmosphere is thick with anxiety. Even the 2 average bullies in the class are unusually quiet. Everyone's on edge because the school's biggest bully is strolling into the classroom with his entourage, and it looks like the drama with Jin is about to kick off big time. But Jin just sits there cool as a cucumber. The 2 bullies who got knocked down yesterday are also strolling down with their boss. Behind them, the biggest bully of all, the top dog, looms large. Right on cue, Daeon bursts into the room like a tornado. She's panting heavily, her face is bruised, and her uniform is smeared with dirt. Jin abruptly stands up from his seat, and his eyes widening in shock as he takes in the sight of his sister's battered face and filthy uniform. The bully boss starts up with some banter, teasing how Jin's sister is worried sick about her brother. He points out how his own sister, Huijin, all she does is whine and nag at him to do things for her. Huijin also strolls into the scene, and reminds her brother that she will only feel sorry when her brother actually gets his ass handed to him by someone. Meanwhile, Jin is left visibly petrified seeing his sister so bruised up. But before we can see his reaction, the scene cuts back a little to the past, when students were just starting to gather in the classroom early in the morning. We see the terrified face of Youngchan taking hits to the head from 2 rowdy individuals, who are using his face for target practice. Jae-hyung is feeling pretty cocky about his direct headshot, and brags to his friend about it. Hyokjin then gets ticked off, and demands this nearby student to hand over his eraser. Once the timid student offers his eraser, Hyokjin quickly takes it. He swings his hand with all his might and delivers a precise headshot to Youngchan. He breaks into a happy dance after landing the perfect hit, but Jae-hyung tries to downplay it, saying this was just a lucky shot. The 2 friends go back and forth, trying to outdo each other with their headshot skills. Jae-hyung decides to take another shot, swinging his hand violently and throwing the eraser down at the poor Youngchan. But surprisingly, Jin steps in, and the eraser hits him in the waist instead. The 2 bullies are annoyed by this sudden interruption, and the eraser falls to the ground. Jin then takes his seat right next to the terrified Youngchan. The redhead is visibly ticked off, feeling Jin is finally getting on his nerves. Hyokjin decides to talk some sense into Jin for stepping in, and the redhead quickly agrees. Meanwhile, our boy simply puts his bag on the desk and asks Youngchan if he's alright. The poor fella mutters that he is fine, but we can tell by his pale face he is not fine at all. Youngchan simply leans toward our boy for avoiding any eye contact with those bullies, and asks our boy if they should hang out after school. Jin reveals that he has to walk home with his sister, so he can't hang out. The timid boy perks up at this, and asks if his sister transferred here with him. Jin shakes his head, saying she was already studying here before he arrived. When Youngchan asks her name, Jin tells him it's Daeon. Youngchan is startled to hear this, and Jin notices his sudden reaction, so he asks his friend if he knows her. At first, Youngchan feels reluctant to say anything, but admits that Daeon isn't having the best time at school lately. He explains that she was quite popular back in middle school for being smart and pretty, which attracted a lot of attention from the guys. But then a blonde girl named Hui Jin, who was jealous, started bullying her. Jin asks if no one stopped them from bullying Daeon. Youngchan reveals that the girl who used to bully her, Hui Jin, has a brother named Gisu Kim, who's one of the worst troublemakers at their school. What's even worse is that Daeon is stuck in the same homeroom as Hui Jin, and she gets bullied to the point where every student is amazed that she still has the courage to come to school. Jin puts two and two together and realizes that Hui Jin started bullying his sister just because someone liked Daeon, and that's the only reason she's being targeted. But Youngchan somberly reveals that this is just an excuse, because Hui Jin simply wanted a reason to bully someone. Jin's mind flashes back to several days before, when his grandpa hoped that Jin would have an easier time adjusting to his new school after living overseas for so long. The grandpa then turns to his granddaughter and asks if she's doing well in school too. At that time, little Daeon charmingly assures her grandpa that she's doing absolutely fine, and never shows a hint of the grievances she faces at school on a daily basis. Her grandpa praises her, noting that Daeon is always a brilliant student, and even her teachers speak highly of her. In the present moment, Jin realizes that his sister was just putting on a brave face and hiding her struggles to keep their grandfather from worrying. Then, one of the rowdy bullies kicks the door open, and the entire gang of school bullies saunters into the classroom. Hyokjin quickly asks these rowdy bunch what they're doing in their class. Gisu Kim, one of the top dogs of the entire school, just says he's there to handle some business. Hyokjin's surprised to see Gisu and is not sure what to do. You see, Hyokjin is a small fry, while he can deal with the other bullies pretty fine, but he doesn't want to get tangled up with Gisu Kim. Meanwhile, Gisu's lackeys inform him about Jin. When Gisu sees Jin, he starts shouting at his lackeys, furious that they got their butts kicked by a scrawny little punk. He dismisses his lackeys and provocatively flicks his finger at Jin, telling him to come over. Jin stands up immediately, while the redhead and Hyokjin look totally confused about what Jin did to tick off Gisu, and they're pretty sure he is pretty much screwed now. Meanwhile, Jin stands his ground defiantly and asks if Gisu is actually the big shot here. Gisu sneers, and he finds it fascinating that our boy took his sweet time to figure out who is in charge here. He turns to his lackey and tells him not to just stand there like an idiot and to make a move. But we can clearly tell that the lackey is absolutely scared, but he eventually steps forward towards Jin. But before the showdown starts, Daeon also bursts into the classroom, breathing heavily. In the current time, this is how Jin finds himself looking at his bruised-up sister. Tears well up in Daeon's eyes as she starts apologizing to Jin for putting him into trouble. Meanwhile, Hui Jin scoffs after seeing those tears, and calls her the biggest drama queen ever. Jin, however, tells his sister she has nothing to apologize for. Before she can say another word, he loses it and slaps this lackey across the face with such force that he hits the ground, knocked out cold. The other bullies, who already know how hard Jin can hit, start to tremble. With one lackey down, Jin turns to his sister and says that these bullies are the ones who should be apologizing. The fatty charges at Jin with a clenched fist, but Jin effortlessly pushes his hand away. When he spots the exposed throat, Jin delivers a brutal, precise smack to it, like a ninja, leaving the bully spitting and coughing before collapsing to the floor. The other lackey, shaking with fear, tries to land a hit on Jin. Jin responds with a crushing blow to his ribs, and with lightning-fast reflexes, sends the lackey tumbling to the ground. Meanwhile, Gisu's confidence has finally started to fade away, as he sees our boy effortlessly taking down his bullies like they're nothing. The local lackeys of this class, who are still in their beta stage, stand there wide-eyed and expressionless. Even Huijin and Chicken Shake are freaking out, completely losing their composure. After taking down the last two bullies, Jin turns to Gisu and makes it clear that his sister has been suffering because of these thugs, and he's not about to stand for it. Gisu finally decides to speak, sneering as he admits that Jin is not a pushover after all. With a smirk, Gisu swings his leg with lightning speed toward Jin's face. But Jin effortlessly blocks the kick, leaving Gisu absolutely stunned, because he did not expect our boy to react so fast. Nonetheless, Gisu quickly swings his other leg, which is also blocked by Jin quite easily. Jin seizes Gisu's leg, pulls him closer, and delivers a brutal punch to his face, The punch sends blood spraying everywhere as Gisu crashes to the ground like a rag doll. His nose and mouth are bleeding, and he looks up in horror at Jin, who towers above him like a goddamn Death Reaper. Without hesitation, Jin swings his leg again, striking the bastard in the face with a powerful kick that sends more blood splattering. The guy, who was once cocky and full of himself, finally hits the ground, defeated and humiliated. The entire class falls silent, eyes wide in shock as they watch Jin take down one of the biggest bullies in one fell swoop. The two beta bullies are slack-jawed as well, unable to believe that our boy just took down a major player like Gisu so effortlessly. The girls are equally horrified, with the blonde especially stunned, unable to fathom if Jin is really this formidable. Jin starts walking towards Huijin, who is feeling terrified because she does not want to get slapped and face the same brutal treatment. But before anything else can happen, Diane rushes to stop her brother, pleading with him not to do anything anymore. Jin reminds her that Huijin and her crew have been bullying her for a long time, and he also knows that she was targeted by them yesterday as well. Diane's face falls as she realizes her brother has uncovered the truth, and she bows her head in silence. She then suddenly realizes that Jin is fighting for her sake, so she quickly forces a smile, telling her brother that she's fine and he should stop. Her brother hesitates at first, but eventually agrees, deciding to walk her to class. As they leave, the students in the room erupt into murmurs, unable to believe that Gisu, the top dog, was taken down by a single boy. Even the beta bullies admit that Jin is hardcore, and they are feeling a wave of relief that they didn't try to take him on earlier. As the chatter continues, the blonde girl trembles in a mix of fear and humiliation, unable to process her defeat. Meanwhile, as Jin and Diane walk together, she expresses her shock at how good her brother is at fighting, but then starts apologizing again. Confused, Jin asks what she's apologizing for. Daeon explains that it was her fault he got dragged into this mess. She feels responsible for the fights he had to endure, both yesterday and today. Jin gives Diane a reassuring smile, telling her she doesn't need to apologize for anything, because this is what families are for, to protect each other. He then begins to explain that back where he used to live, everyone only looked out for themselves. They didn't care what happened to others as long as they weren't the ones suffering. But even those people would act differently when their own families were involved. That is when the scene cuts down into the memory lane, to a chaotic battlefield, with smoke and explosions tearing through the area. Gunfire and bombardments echo from both sides. In the middle of the madness, we see a younger Jin, caught in the mayhem. Among the carnage, he spots one of the opposing soldiers desperately trying to save his little daughter, shielding her from a man who is holding his gun right over their faces. Even in the middle of the violence, the sight of that soldier risking everything for his child left a deep impression on Jin. It made him question what family truly meant and why it was so important. In the current moment, Diane points out that he barely remembers her. So why is he still going out of his way to help? The boy agrees, admitting it's true he doesn't remember her, but insists that doesn't change the fact that they're family. The girl just stands there in silence, but just as our boy's words sink inside her mind, she starts to feel a bit embarrassed. She quickly tells him she's fine and that he should head back to his class. She points out that they're already at her homeroom, so she waves a final goodbye and vanishes, leaving the boy with a faint smile on his face. Back in his room, Jin is still the hot topic of conversation, and he's feeling a bit awkward with all the attention he is getting. The beta bullies then flash him a thumbs up, cheerfully asking what kind of lessons he got overseas because he took those noobs down like they were yesterday's leftovers. They keep showering him with praise, but the boy just sinks into his seat, looking a bit overwhelmed. Even his friend Young Chun chimes in, saying he was actually pretty awesome, which brings a subtle smile to Jin's face. Meanwhile, we shift to the defeated goons, who are feeling pretty anxious after their embarrassing loss. Their boss, in particular, is still fuming, grumbling that there's something different about our boy, because he doesn't fight like your average third-rate thug. His sister tries to cheer him up, reminding him to stop sulking and pointing out that their loss was just a fluke, and Jin just caught them off guard, so she suggests they should try to catch him later. But the bullies stay silent, because they've learned the hard way that our boy is a powerhouse not to be messed with. Still, the blondie reminds her that he's just one guy, and they shouldn't let some dude take us down like this. Her brother finally shuts her up, telling her if she's itching for a fight, she can go take on the boy herself if she thinks it's so easy. Of course, Huijin doesn't like the way her brother's talking to her, so she snaps back that he shouldn't take his frustration out on her just because he got his butt handed to him by some random guy. Her brother is absolutely furious, and it's clear Huijin's words hit him hard. He is seething in anger because we all know that she is speaking some uncomfortable truth. Huijin glares at him one last time, her eyes welling up with tears from the frustration of seeing her brother act like this. Quietly, she turns around and slams the door behind her as she leaves. As she stomps down the corridor, Chicken Shake catches up with her from behind. Meanwhile, Blondie is absolutely fuming. It's incredibly frustrating for her that all those bullies couldn't handle just one guy. She slams the door open as she storms into the classroom, and when she sees Daeon sitting in the classroom, she asks our girl that she must be feeling pretty lucky to have a brother now. She reminds her how she now can go to school without a care in the world, and can just run to her big brother if she gets into trouble. Daeon doesn't say a word in response, which only makes Huijin more annoyed. She thinks Daeon is giving her the cold shoulder just because she has her brother around. She grits her teeth in frustration and makes it clear that she won't let Daeon do whatever she wants just because she has a brother. As dusk starts to settle, students begin heading home, and among the crowd is our girl, looking pretty dejected. She's lost in thought, recalling the scene where her brother stood up for her and fought those thugs. She remembers him saying they're a family, and wonders if this means she can finally go to school without worrying about getting bullied. Her mind drifts back to her miserable days under Huijin's rule, where she was constantly bossed around and obeyed every command like a faithful dog. Whenever she tried to speak up for herself, she'd get slapped down. Suddenly, her brother appears behind her and asks if something's bothering her. She is startled by this sudden call, but our boy reminds her that he'd called her a few times already. But she did not respond. The sister quickly says sorry, explaining she didn't hear him, and then asks if he was waiting for her again. The boy nods, saying he was because he still doesn't know his way back home. So, they start walking together, talking about how they should grab some groceries on the way, since Grandpa always gets super hungry when he's home late. As they walk side by side, that rowdy bitch stands behind them. She's looking utterly mad and just can't handle seeing the smile on our girl's face. This bitch is biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to make Daeon forget how to smile. In the next scene, we see our duo is shopping around the store. The girl seems to be having a tough time choosing what to get, while people around the store are looking at our duo. Girls in the store can't seem to take their eyes off our boy, and Daeon can't help but notice how much attention he's drawing from the ladies. She knew he was popular at school, but it seems he stands out even outside of it. Out of curiosity, Daeon finally asks her brother if he's ever had a girlfriend back when he was overseas. The sudden question takes him by surprise, and he looks like he's never even heard of the term girlfriend before. Seeing his confusion, Daeon clarifies, saying she means a girl he might be dating. He simply replies that he hasn't had any, which prompts his sister to suggest that he should consider having a girlfriend, especially since he's always attracting girls like a magnet wherever he goes. The boy stays silent for a moment before saying that he's always been too busy to have time for a girlfriend. Daeon understands where he's coming from, especially since he's been busy adjusting to a new country. That's when the boy turns the question back on her, asking if she's ever had a boyfriend. The question catches her off guard, and she quickly replies that she hasn't had one either. When he asks why not, she just says she's been busy as well. When they finally get home, we see our boy has been gifted a Samsung Galaxy phone by his grandpa. He's a bit disappointed because he wanted an iPhone instead. Grandpa quickly educates his grandson that iPhones have lousy battery life, so it's better to use a Samsung instead, especially since all the kids nowadays have iPhones. It's kind of a funny jab, suggesting that having a Samsung might actually make him stand out. Daeon, on the other hand, is pretty excited because she wanted a Galaxy phone for herself, and she can tell it's the latest model. The boy starts playing around with the phone, while Grandpa reveals that he's already saved Daeon's and his own number in it. Daeon is surprised to find out that Grandpa saved the phone numbers himself since she usually helps with stuff like that. Grandpa quickly clears it up, saying he got some help from the salesperson. He adds with a grin that he's heard how the younger crowd loves to unbox new things themselves, so he hoped our boy wouldn't mind that he opened the box to save their numbers. In response, Jin quickly says he's totally fine with it. Grandpa then apologizes to Daeon, saying the store only had one of those phones, so he couldn't get one for her too. Daeon reassures him it's no big deal, and they end up having a great dinner, chatting and enjoying their family time. Later that night, the boy is still playing around with his new phone, and he is really digging into the Galaxy experience. He starts to think maybe Samsung phones aren't so bad after all, and could be even better than iPhones. The scene cuts to Major Kang, who's busy working at his computer when his phone rings. He picks it up and sees it's Jin, who lets his senior know that he's got a new phone and this is his new number from now on. The senior is a bit surprised by this news, and even the junior standing behind him asks if Major Kang didn't already give Jin a phone. Major Kang confirms that he did. That's when the senior gets tomato red with anger, pointing out that he had given Jin the most expensive iPhone they had, so he is kind of furious that Jin has changed his phone already. The next morning arrives, and Jin comes out of a cozy shower and notices his sister rushing out in her uniform. Before she leaves, Jin asks why she's heading out so early. She tells him she's actually running late and bolts out without wasting any time. She also reminds him that dinner is already set up, so all he has to do is put the dishes in the sink. As she's rushing down the street, she glances at her phone and is relieved to see that she'll make it on time. She had gotten delayed because she wanted to make a delicious soup for Grandpa, and seeing him smile after eating it made it all worth it. She's just happy to do something nice for him. Her moment of happiness is abruptly cut short when she gets a solid kick to her ribs and crashes to the ground. Standing over her are 3 girls, all decked out in hoodies and masks to hide their identities. The one at the front tells Daeon to watch where she's running and accuses her of nearly breaking her ankle. It's clear these girls are just looking for trouble and making excuses to pick a fight. They demand that Daeon apologize for her so-called blunder. The poor girl quickly nods and says she's really sorry. But the rowdy leader isn't satisfied and slaps Daeon across the face and insists she apologize like a whimpering dog. That's when one of the girls with a ponytail suggests they all head to a karaoke spot to blow off some steam. Another girl quickly agrees, saying that they definitely need to relax and have some fun. The ponytail girl crouches down to meet Daeon at eye level. With a smug grin, she invites our girl to join them in their karaoke session, and she is sure that they are going to have a blast there. The second Daeon hears that voice, she instantly recognizes that this is Huijin Kim, and she is definitely here to make our girl's life miserable. Before she knows it, they're all at a dingy karaoke place. The manager, catching sight of these shady-looking girls, can't help but feel uneasy. A while later, we see the manager again, who is pacing nervously toward the room where those girls had their karaoke session. He mutters to himself about how rowdy kids have gotten these days, and wonders what kind of mess those ladies might have left behind, because in their entire karaoke session, all he heard was loud screaming noises. The manager turns the lever and opens the door, only to find Daeon sprawled on the floor, clearly beaten up. Thankfully, she's conscious and starts to slowly get up. She fumbles with her things, her hands shaking as she gathers her stuff. The manager is utterly confused to see this unexpected sight and decides to call an ambulance, but Daeon flatly refuses and stumbles out the door. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, the teacher is taking attendance and notices that Daeon is still missing. When the students confirm she's not there, everyone is confused since Daeon wouldn't just skip school without letting anyone know. In the background, Huijin Kim is smirking, clearly pleased with herself. Chicken Shake turns to her friend and asks if she thinks Daeon will be okay. In response, Huijin simply tells her friend not to panic. She reminds her that Daeon missing school has nothing to do with them. Chicken Shake nervously agrees, playing along and affirming that it's indeed true and has nothing to do with them. Finally, the school bell rings, signaling the end of the day. As usual, the boy waits outside for his sister, but he can't seem to spot her in the crowd of students. The crowd begins to thin out, and soon there's hardly anyone around, but his sister is still nowhere in sight. He waits for a bit, then pulls out his phone and tries calling her, wondering if she might have gone home already. Meanwhile, she's already back home, and her phone rings endlessly as her brother keeps calling, but she doesn't bother to answer and lets it ring. Eventually, the boy heads back home. His eyes immediately spot the sneakers she wears sitting over the doorstep. He pulls off his bag from over his shoulder and goes to her door, giving it a gentle knock and asking if she's inside. The girl quickly responds, and the brother feels a wave of relief knowing she's indeed there. Daeon quickly asks if Jin waited outside the school today too. Jin no Diaz and mentions that he even tried calling her, but she didn't answer. The girl apologizes heartily, saying she must have been asleep. Jin picks up on the odd tone in her voice and asks if he can come in for a second. Daeon quickly comes up with an excuse, saying she's in bed because she's not feeling well. Worried, Jin asks if it's something serious. She reassures him that it's just a slight fever and that she'll be fine after some rest. Jin tells her to call him if she needs anything and decides to head out, planning to grab some medicine for her. But Jin suddenly stops at the door and notices that her sneakers are stained with blood. It doesn't take him long to realize something serious must have happened, since blood on her shoes isn't something you see every day. Once he pieces it together, he grabs the first aid kit and heads into her room to tend to her injuries. She winces as he applies bandages to her bruised face. It seems Jin still doesn't know the full story. Daeon tells him she fell down the stairs while trying to dodge a bicycle. However, Jin points out that her injuries seem quite severe for a simple accident, and asks if she doesn't want to see a doctor. She hesitates for a moment before insisting she's totally fine. I guess her hesitation to visit the doctor is understandable, because if she goes to the hospital, they'll discover the bruises aren't from a fall down the stairs. The scene then cuts to Daeon's past, where we find ourselves in the principal's office. Daeon is telling the principal that she was beaten up by Huijin. However, Huijin flatly denies the accusations. The police are also involved in the case, and Daeon insists that Huijin was the one who beat her up. She explains that Huijin was wearing a mask and hat, but she recognized her voice and is certain it was her. Besides, Huijin has a history of bullying her at school. But then Huijin, with a sly smirk, asks how Daeon can accuse her when she didn't even see her face. The principal questions Daeon if she saw the face of the person who assaulted her. Daeon responds once again that the assailant's face was covered, but she's sure it was Huijin. At this point, Huijin's mother bursts with anger. She angrily accuses Daeun of calling the police and treating her daughter like a criminal over a ridiculous accusation. The principal tries to calm the furious mother down, but she refuses to listen and makes it clear that she won't calm down. Meanwhile, Huijin's confidence crumbles as she realizes that no one seems to believe her, despite her certainty that Huijin was the culprit. Even the police officers are skeptical. The mother demands that Daeun apologize to her daughter immediately for the accusation. But our girl stands her ground and tells the woman that it was indeed her daughter who assaulted her. The arrogant mother is infuriated by this and decides she will take the matter up with Daeun's parents. She demands our girl to bring her parents to the school right away. This just breaks Daeun's heart. She feels tears streaming down her face involuntarily, while the villain who assaulted her laughs and walks away unpunished. In the present, she feels trapped in the same situation she faced in the past. She believes that raising her voice without solid proof is futile and is determined not to offend her grandfather, who has always been a supportive figure for her. Suddenly, Jin notices her tense expression and puts his hand on her forehead, asking if she's really okay. The girl responds, albeit weakly, that she's fine. Jin points out that while her bones aren't broken, the bruises are pretty severe and will hurt for a few days. She nods and finds it surprising that he's actually quite good at this patching up stuff, because she can tell the bandages are perfectly placed. She then becomes somber, remembering their grandfather. She's worried he might get upset about all this, especially since he has a weak heart. This news comes as a surprise to Jin, and the girl further reveals that their grandfather takes pills to regulate his heart health. In response, Jin promises her that he'll make sure their grandfather won't catch whiff of this predicament, and tells her to just get some sleep. As he begins to walk away, she calls out to him from behind. With a pleasant smile, she thanks him for all his help, and Jin reciprocates with the same warm smile. But once he's gone, her smile fades. She wonders if she did the right thing by not telling him everything. She feels that there's nothing a couple of teenagers like her and her brother can really do about the situation. However, we all know that Jin isn't an ordinary teenager, and I wouldn't be surprised if he already knows who was behind her injuries. Later, we find ourselves in a club where the high-energy music is blasting and people are buzzing. In the middle of it all, we spot the boss bully, Gisu Kim. He's gritting his teeth as he drinks and laughs with his boys. They're all discussing Jin and wondering how a single brat could manage to mess things up for everyone. One thug speaks up, reminding everyone that their downfall was due to underestimating Jin. He insists that they can take him out easily if they plan ahead. Another goon agrees, emphasizing that they can't just let him get away with this. A third adds that Jin won't stand a chance against all of them. Despite their enthusiasm, their boss knows that taking Jin down won't be a walk in the park. He's still seething from the humiliating defeat, but doesn't want to let it slide. He puts his glass down in frustration and reluctantly agrees with his lackeys. He makes it clear that going one-on-one isn't their style, so they might think of a strategic plan to take our boy down with numbers. The lackeys grin like Cheshire cats, clearly excited about their plan. This rowdy bunch may think they've got it all figured out, but they're nothing more than a pack of hyenas destined to get their comeuppance from Jin sooner or later. Just as they're planning their next move, Gisu's phone rings. The caller ID shows it's from someone labeled Little Bitch. It turns out to be his little sister, and it seems like even Gisu agrees with us that she indeed is a bitch. Anyway, she starts yelling at him, asking why he's just sitting around at the club. Gisu tells her to either say what she wants or he's hanging up. The girl insists that he owes her big time. Gisu confusingly asks what she's talking about. She then reveals that he roughed up Daeun earlier today. She tells him they can't let the siblings get away with it, or they'll lose their authority in the whole school. Her brother, feeling a bit proud of his sister, tells her she did a good job. He reveals that they're also planning to get payback on Jin. Just then, someone walks into the club. As the bullies turn to see who it is, they realize it's Jin. He appears to be there to settle some business. Gisu gets absolutely furious at the sight of Jin casually walking into his turf. But Jin just walks toward their table with a calm demeanor. Gisu then feels somewhat relieved that they don't have to hunt Jin down anymore to get their revenge. However, Jin isn't there for a friendly chat either, and without wasting any time, he grabs one of the lackeys by the face and slams him down hard against the edge of the table. Another lackey charges at him, but Jin's hand moves so fast that his single punch shatters all the ribs of the attacker. The bully leader and his lackeys grit their teeth seeing their goons go down. The rest of the crew charges at Jin, but my guy just stays cool as a cucumber. As they get close, he kicks one of them down effortlessly, like a true Sigma male. Next, he grabs this purple head and slams him down on the table with a brutal thud. While this purple head is cowering for his life, Jin doesn't stop there and slams this dude against the wall like a rag doll. Then he balls up his fist and delivers a devastating blow to the fatty's face. One of the thugs grabs a glass bottle and swings it at Jin, but my guy casually knocks the bottle from his hand and follows up with a brutal whack to his face. which leaves the thug bleeding his mouth out. Another bully charges from behind, but Jin ducks down, grabs his hand, twists it painfully, and then delivers a hard slap across his face. Jin throws the thug aside and then grabs another lackey by the face. He smashes the guy's ugly mug right into his knee, breaking the thug's nose with a sickening crunch. With all the thugs down for the count, Gisu is left speechless, unable to process what's happening. Meanwhile, his sister is still on the line, and she quickly asks what's going on, because she has been hearing the loud commotion and chaos. Jin turns to Gisu with a chill in his voice, making Gisu shiver. He asks if he needs to repeat himself, because as far as Jin remembers, he's already told Gisu to stay away from his sister. Gisu is absolutely boggled out of his mind to see how the tables have turned. It's kind of ironic that they tried to gang up on Jin, only to end up getting their own gang banged. Jin fought like a pro, and wiped the floor with everyone in just a few seconds. Meanwhile, Jin continues to question Gisu, asking what his sister ever did to him. Gisu plays dumb, pretending he knows nothing, while secretly reaching for a glass on the table. He throws the glass at Jin with lightning speed, but Jin just steps back casually, letting the glass shatter against the wall. As he stands there nonchalantly, Gisu grabs a bottle and swings it at him. Our boy steps back once again, avoiding the hit, but when Gisu swings the bottle once more, Jin knocks it out of his hand and counters with a punch, sending the contents of the bottle splattering everywhere. Gisu tries to swing his fist this time, but my guy responds with another brutal smack to the bastard's face, leaving his nose bleeding like crazy. Gisu stumbles backward, gasping for air after the hit, while Jin remains cool and composed, not even breaking a sweat. Jin then asks this bastard what twisted pleasure he gets from harassing a helpless girl. In a desperate move, Gisu grabs a bottle, shatters it, and aims the sharp pieces at Jin's chest. But our boy shows no fear, and he quickly slaps Gisu's hand hard, making the bottle drop. Then he grabs Gisu by the throat and squeezes, causing him to struggle for breath. Gisu's feet trip over themselves as he struggles helplessly, and Jin forcefully drives him to the ground. The bastard writhes and squirms, desperately trying to break free from Jin's iron grip, but my guy doesn't let up. His hand pressed firmly on Gisu's throat, ensuring the once cocky bully knows exactly who's in control now. Jin then leans in and asks Gisu what he should do with him. Gisu, barely clinging to consciousness after the brutal beating, can't muster a response. Jin delivers his final warning, making it clear this is the last time he'll spare him. He warns him to stay away from his sister and to keep Huijin, who is Gisu's sister, in check as well. He emphasizes that if he hears even a rumor about Gisu or Huijin bothering his sister again, he'll be back to finish what he started. To drive his point home, Jin tightens his grip on the bastard's throat even further, pushing him to the brink of unconsciousness. The bully is now desperate and on the edge, starts squirming and apologizing profusely. After that, Jin finally releases his grip, leaving Gisu gasping for air and coughing violently as Jin walks away. As Jin walks out of the club, the staff inside exchange nervous glances, unsure of what just went down. Meanwhile, Huijin and her friend Chicken Shake are strolling down the street. Huijin has got a bad vibe and starts worrying that her brother might be in trouble. When they reach the club, they hear footsteps coming up the stairs, and it's Jin, casually making his exit. Huijin is caught off guard and isn't sure what to do. She shouts for Jin to stop, thinking she can still play it cool because no one can pin the blame of what she did to Daeon. But Jin doesn't even slow down. Huijin, now really nervous, starts backing away, trips, and falls hard on her butt. While she's rubbing her sore shoulder, Jin's phone rings. He checks it and sees it's his grandpa calling. After a quick chat, he simply turns around and just heads home quietly, leaving them curious about what he is even thinking. When Huijin enters the clubroom, the scene is a mess. Her brother and his lackeys are all battered and bruised. She immediately starts shouting at him, demanding to know how he got whooped by Jin again. But her brother, too exhausted to argue, cuts her off and tells her to stay the hell away from Daeon from now on. Huijin, not grasping the seriousness of the situation, keeps pushing back, asking what the hell he's talking about. Her brother, visibly frustrated, finally loses it. He grits his teeth and yells at her to leave our boy's sister the fuck alone. But Huijin doesn't back down and keeps shouting, questioning why he's so afraid of that bastard. That's the breaking point, and her brother snaps with his eyes blazing with anger. He makes it crystal clear that if she doesn't steer clear of Daeon, he'll make sure to mess her up himself. Yikes, these siblings have a seriously twisted way of dealing with each other. It's wild how casually they talk about screwing each other over. Huijin is shaken by her brother's outburst, and she begins to tear up. We're back with our boy, who spots the grandfather once again. They sit down on a bench in the park. First off, Grandpa apologizes for pulling our boy away while he was having fun with his friends, but our boy says it's all good. The old man then gets a bit sad, mentioning that Daeon got injured, and our boy was the one who treated his injuries. Our boy confirms it, and the old man explains that her injuries are pretty serious, but she refuses to go to the hospital. He shares how tough it's been raising Dayan on his own. He never really knew how to raise a young girl and was always working hard to put food on the table, and he is just grateful she's come this far on her own. Grandpa reflects on all those years and says that looking back, Dayan has given him so much more than he's ever been able to give her. He lost everything in that accident, and Dayan was the only thing that kept him going after the plane crash took everything away from him. It breaks his heart to see her so hurt, and not even tell him the real reason behind it. He wonders if she thinks he's too old to understand. He mentions a saying about how kids become distant from their parents as they grow older, so it must be even harder for her to reach out to an old grandpa. But our boy quickly reassures the old man that he's just overthinking. He points out that it's clear how much Grandpa loves Dayan, and he's sure Dayan loves him just as much. He tells Grandpa to stop worrying so much and promises that he'll look out for her at school. Hearing this, the old man is finally a bit relieved and genuinely happy that Dayan has a brother-like figure in her life. The next scene shifts to Omnia Medical Examination Center. Inside, we see Gisu with his injuries finally patched up. He's getting an earful from his father, who's clearly disappointed in him. His dad doesn't hold back, making it clear that Gisu deserves every one of those injuries because, as he puts it, if you're going to play stupid games, you're going to win stupid prizes. The arrogant mother starts yelling at her husband, clearly outraged. She reminds him that their son is in the hospital, and this is all he has to say? She tells him to go find the brute who did this and yell at him instead. She also points out that the same brute busted Huijin's arm too. Honestly, it's a real mess. Huijin is a bitch to the point that she even pinned the blame of her own mishap on our boy. We all know that she tripped and banged up her shoulder, but instead of taking responsibility, she's blaming him for everything. The angry father finally calms down and lets out a deep sigh. The concerned mother tells her son to just focus on resting and recovering. As they start to leave, the mother grumbles about making the kid who hurt their son pay if she ever gets her hands on him. Once they're gone, Gisu finally asks his sister why she had to tell their parents everything. He explains that by doing so, she's just made things worse for him. He feels humiliated that people will think he ran to their parents like a whining brat after getting beaten up. His sister then asks how she was supposed to hide the fact that her brother was in the hospital and that her arm was broken. Gisu gets pretty ticked off and demands to know if Jin was the one who did this to her arm. She remembers how she tripped and fell, but she doesn't mention that to him. Instead, she just says that Jin was responsible. It's messed up how she's shifting the blame so shamelessly. She then quickly stands up and tells him to just stay here and get better. She says she'll make sure they realize once and for all who they're dealing with. Jisoo sits there, unsure if they should mess with our boy again. Meanwhile, we're back with their parents. The woman reveals that she's just spoken to Mr. Cha, but her husband asks why she's complicating things and tells her to let the school handle it. The woman responds that it's Saturday already, and she doesn't want to sit back and twiddle her thumbs waiting for them. She starts yelling, pointing out that the school won't deliver real justice for what was done to their kids, and they'll likely only settle for a suspension or expulsion at best. The husband continues to argue, saying she has no business going to Mr. Cha to handle this personally. The woman reveals that she already knows Mr. Cha and that he's been handling his dirty work for years. Meanwhile, Huijin is eavesdropping and feeling pretty smug about her mother contacting Mr. Cha. She knows that Mr. Cha is the scary gangster who works for her father, and she's sure this will put an end to those troublemakers once and for all. The scene shifts to a rundown place where a man is fidgeting with his lighter, clearly on edge. Two goons walk by, looking pretty disappointed. They grumble about being ordered by their boss to handle some teenage drama, and none of them are thrilled about it. Even the boss himself isn't thrilled about dealing with this kid's squabble. But hey, a job's a job, even if it means wading through a mess of teenage nonsense. The scene flashes back to a time where a luxury Mercedes is zooming down the road. Inside the car, Mr. Cha, the mafia boss, takes a call from the woman. She fills him in on how her daughter's hand got fractured, and her son got beaten up by some teenager. She's insisting that he needs to handle it. Cutting back to the present, Mr. Cha is puffing out smoke from his cigarette, clearly fuming. He's beyond frustrated that he has to deal with this kind of nonsense as well. The scene transitions back to the quarters, where our boy is sitting before his computer, still lost in thought about his encounter with the Gisu. He's wondering if these guys are really going to let it go. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. He hears his grandpa arguing with someone at the door. It turns out that the people at their doorstep want to see Jin. The intimidating man outside claims they just want to talk to Jin for a bit. Grandpa, concerned about the late hour, questions what could be so urgent. Our boy steps out of his room, telling his grandpa that he'll be back soon after he hears what they want. Despite Grandpa's reluctance and even his sister's protests, Jin flashes a pleasant smile. He reassures them that he knows these guys and that it's just a quick chat, nothing to worry about. With that, our boy leaves his concerned grandpa behind. The goons take him to an abandoned construction site, and he wonders who they might be taking him to meet. When they finally arrive, the lackeys report to their boss that they've brought the guy in question. The boss remains silent, puffing on his cigarette. The bald lackey reveals that the kid caught on quickly, didn't make a fuss, and just came along. The boss, a bit surprised and pleased, decides to make it quick. He snaps his fingers, and the lackeys immediately grab their iron bats. One lackey tells his friend to hold our boy's arm, as he'll be the one to dish out the beating. Meanwhile, the boss sighs and decides to text the mother, letting her know that he's taken care of the job. While the boss scrolls through his phone looking for that mother's number, the lackeys ask him why our boy had to mess with the kids of Kim family. As soon as our boy hears the mention of kids, he realizes this must be about Gisu Kim. The boss, feeling frustrated and annoyed, pauses his scrolling, deciding he shouldn't call her while our boy is present. However, he looks over at our boy and is intrigued by how unfazed and emotionless he appears. Just as the lackeys charge at him, Jin suddenly uses his ninja-like speed. He grabs the bald lackey's hand before he can swing at him and pushes the man toward him, delivering a brutal shoulder smash right to the lackey's face. The boss watches this with his wide-eyed eyes, as he witnesses this flawless execution of the move. Meanwhile, the other lackey, bat in hand, swings at our boy. He ducks, letting the bat swoosh harmlessly over his head. But the lackey tries another swing, but our boy charges at the bat as if it's no big deal, leaving the mafia boss utterly bewildered. With lightning speed, our boy locks the baseball bat in his arm and delivers a brutal punch right under the lackey's chin. Not stopping there, he follows up with a devastating blow to the lackey's chest. Then, with a fierce grip, he grabs the lackey by the neck and throws him down onto the bricks below. The boss watches in shock, clearly impressed and flabbergasted by the sheer skill and audacity of our boy's moves. The bald lackey grabs our boy from behind, threatening him with death. But our boy quickly jabs his shoulder into the lackey's ribs, and then delivers a solid shoulder smash to his face, sending him crashing to the ground. Mr. Cha realizes that this kid is no average teenager, because his combat skills are exceptional. He finally decides to step in himself. As he strolls forward, he scratches his head, snickering and commenting that he never thought he'd be fighting teenagers at his age. Meanwhile, our boy can tell that even though this man is a mafia boss, he still is a weak sauce, because my guy can clearly spot all of the weak spots of this man. As the boss swings a powerful fist at him, Jin effortlessly sidesteps it. The boss then starts a barrage of punches, but our boy dodges each one with ease, making it look like a walk in the park. As they continue their back and forth, our boy quickly sidesteps, but another punch comes straight at him. He blocks the hit, though the heavy force makes him skid backward. The mafia boss sneers, impressed that he managed to block that one as well. Meanwhile, Jin checks his wrist where he took the punch and his hand winces from the aching pain. He realizes that the mafia boss predicted his movements and delivered the punch with precision. On the other hand, the mafia boss's curiosity has finally peaked, and he asks Jin who he really is. Jin casually replies that he's just a high school student. The boss isn't buying it. In his mind, he figures this kid must have some serious skill and experience to fight like this. Jin takes his stance. With a grin, the boss says he's up for sparring further, and balls up his fist to deliver a blow to our boy. Our boy quickly deflects an incoming punch and tries to throw one of his own, but the mafia boss sidesteps it effortlessly. The boss then attempts to attack, but our boy grabs his hand and swings a punch towards his gut. The mafia boss reacts again, causing our boy to end up landing a hit right to his face instead. Mr. Cha is absolutely annoyed after taking that hit right over his face and tries to swing another punch at our boy. Once again, our boy deflects the attack and, locking eyes with his opponent, delivers a brutal blow to his face. He follows this up with a series of powerful punches, knocking Mr. Cha to the ground, leaving him feeling utterly humiliated by a teenager. It's surprising to see a mafia boss who relies more on his fists than on guns. Anyway, once Mr. Cha is defeated, he grins, noticing that our boy doesn't seem rattled at all by the fight. He doesn't know where this kid came from, but he's sure that the Kim family definitely messed with the wrong person. The scene transitions to this agency, known as National Assembly member In-bai Kim. Inside the building, 2 guards are stationed outside an office. Inside the office, we see Mrs. Kim and Mr. Kim. The woman asks her husband why Mr. Cha hasn't responded yet. She is growing impatient with every passing second, tells him to call Mr. Cha. Mr. Kim responds that she should just wait, as Mr. Cha will call back once he is done dealing with our boy. On the other hand, we also see their daughter, who lets out a sigh, and just then, the telephone begins to beep. The impatient lady quickly tells her husband to put the call on speaker so she can hear the news herself. Mr. Kim begins by apologizing to Mr. Cha, saying he's sorry for the ridiculous favor his wife asked him to fulfill. But the women, however, continue to argue loudly, insisting that their kids were attacked, so she doesn't understand how it can be called ridiculous. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Cha says that he's the one who should apologize. Mr. Kim asks for an explanation, and Mr. Cha reveals that it seems their children have meddled with the wrong person, because Cha himself also had been defeated by our boy. This news rattles Mr. Kim to the core. As far as he knows, Mr. Cha is the best enforcer in the business, and it's unfathomable that he lost to a high school kid. Just then, the office door starts rattling as someone tries to force it open. Both Mr. and Mrs. Kim look anxiously at the door. When it finally creaks open, they see soldiers sprawled on the ground, leaving the husband and wife utterly anxious and alarmed. Even their bratty daughter jumps out of her seat when they see Jin strolling into the room. The door behind him slams shut, leaving their unconscious bodyguards on the other side. Mr. Cha, still on the phone, quickly realizes that Jin has made it into their place. He leans back, letting out a defeated sigh. He's still trying to wrap his head around the fact that he got beaten by a single high school kid. He's now anxious about how to deal with this mess. Inside the room, Hui-jin jumps up from her seat as Mrs. Kim starts yelling at Jin, demanding to know if he's the kid who beat up her children. On the other side, the man at the desk demands to know how Jin managed to get into his office. That is when this stupid woman begins to grit her teeth in frustration, because she is pissed that her husband is not overreacting like her. The husband remains calm and composed and asks again, more insistently, how Jin got past the security. Jin just shrugs and casually replies that he simply passed the guards blocking the entrance. Mr. Kim is even more shocked and confused, not understanding how Jin managed to beat Mr. Cha and all the security guards. What bothers him even more is how Jin even found out that he's living here. That shithead woman starts yelling again, telling Jin to stop giving them attitude. She quickly begins dialing the emergency hotline to report Jin for assaulting her kids and breaking into the office. Meanwhile, Hui-jin feels a sense of pride in her mother's actions. She believes that involving the police is a good move, thinking that even if Jin has impressive fighting skills, the law will take care of him. The arrogant mother tries to intimidate Jin with her threats, claiming she'll call the police or even the district attorney because she thinks Jin has no idea who he's dealing with. Jin, however, remains calm and responds that he has a pretty good idea. He points out that her husband is a second-term assembly member currently running for office. The woman scoffs, asking Jin if he knows so much about their status. Then why did he assault her kids? On the other hand, Hui-jin smugly sneers, feeling satisfied that they've cornered Jin, and faintly tells him that it's game over. The authorities pick up the call, and the lady starts yelling into the phone, demanding that the officers reach Kim's office right away. But before she can say anything more, she falls silent when she hears something unexpected. Apparently, Jin plays the full footage of the karaoke room where Hui-jin and her lackeys assaulted her sister. The undeniable evidence leaves Hui-jin speechless, her eyes widening in shock as if they might pop out of their sockets. Mr. Kim stays silent, feeling utterly devastated. The screams of Daeon begging for forgiveness echo through the room, as the trashy ladies continue to beat her to a pulp. Seeing the concrete evidence, Mrs. Kim's jaw drops, and she quickly hangs up the hotline, saying she'll call them back later. On the other hand, Hui-jin starts yelling at Jin, demanding to know how he got those files. Jin remains silent for a moment, and then the scene flashes back to the outside of the Kim's residence. Inside one of the rooms, Jin is seen sneaking around the house. He opens a laptop and copies all of the data onto a pen drive. In the present, Mr. Kim grits his teeth in frustration, feeling that his kids are a total disappointment. But Hui-jin quickly tries to reassure her father, explaining that she had a good reason for everything. Mr. Kim, however, angrily tells her to shut up. Jin then reveals that he also has files involving Gisu Kim. He explains to the Kims that their children always save videos of their conquests. He states that he has dozens of clips showing their violent behavior, beating up kids at school, extorting money and valuables from their victims, and even the latest clip of his sister being assaulted by a group of girls at karaoke. Hui-jin is shaking like a leaf with all these truth bombs exploding around her, but her mother quickly jumps in to defend her daughter, claiming that our boy is just trying to threaten them and that he won't get away with it. But Jin reminds her that he didn't start this mess, and what he's doing now is hardly a threat compared to hiring a bunch of gangsters to attack him, and makes it clear that he has recorded all of it too. The father facepalms in utter disappointment, and asks our boy if he did all this just because his kids assaulted his sister first. Jin responds that, as a parent, they have the right to take their children's side at all costs, so as a brother, he will do whatever it takes to protect his sister as well. The man understands where he's coming from, and points out that they'll cover her treatment and offer a hefty settlement to make amends. But our boy makes it clear that this isn't necessary. The father is puzzled and asks what he means by that. He then inquires if Jin would like his kids to apologize to his sister. Hearing her father, Hui-jin grits her teeth and thinks to herself that she'd rather bite her tongue and bleed to death than apologize. On the other hand, our boy makes it clear that an apology won't undo the time his sister spent in fear and pain. So he insists that if they really want to compensate him, he wants his sister to never have to see Jisoo or Hui-jin Kim again. This demand rattles Huijin's nerves, but her father quickly agrees, stating that he'll have his kids transfer schools or perhaps even send them abroad to study. Naturally, the mother and daughter let out a piercing scream in protest, but the father quickly shuts them down and turns his attention back to our boy, asking if this would be enough to satisfy him. Our boy states that he wants them gone from the school starting tomorrow. In response, the father says he'll inform the school, and once that's settled, Huijin begins to cry, and her tears flow out involuntarily. Just as our boy starts to leave, the father quickly stops him and reminds him that, since he agreed to the demands, he'd like our boy to delete all of the videos he found. Our boy shoots the old man a death glare, and the father can tell from the intensity of his eyes that this kind of deadly glare doesn't belong to a high schooler. Jin makes it clear that he's not a fool, and then begins to walk away, slamming the office door behind him with a resounding thud. Once outside, he finally heads home. His grandpa rushes to open the door and asks if he's okay, while Daeon is seen crying in the background. Jin is startled to see them so worried about him, but he smiles and reassures them that no one hurt him. As he begins to enter the house, the old man points out that the people they encountered seemed dangerous. Jin replies that they just stopped by to talk, nothing more. The sister then mentions that something about those people didn't feel right, and that she and Grandpa were very worried. Jin quickly tells her not to worry about anything other than getting better. Jin then hints to his sister that, from now on, she'll never have to walk down the stairs again because he's taken care of it. Of course, this doesn't make much sense to her at the moment, but she'll likely figure out what he meant soon enough. The next morning, they head to the school. Once inside, they part ways to go to their respective classes. As Daeon enters her classroom, she tries to avoid making eye contact with Huijin. However, her steps falter when she hears students talking about how Huijin won't be coming to school anymore. The entire class buzzes with curiosity about what happened, and one of the girls explains that Huijin and her brother are both going to study abroad. This news hits Daeon like a thunderbolt out of blue, because her biggest obstacle is finally quitting school. The words Jin had said about taking care of the stairs she had fallen down replay in her mind. She quickly realizes that he must have known about Huijin's transfer all along. Daeon rushes out of the classroom in order to talk to him about this. When she finds him and calls out to him, he turns around, but as soon as she tries to speak, she's at a loss for words and remains silent. Jin simply smiles and says, "See you later," leaving Daeon to tear up. She manages to reciprocate with a soft, "See you later," before she breaks down, her emotions overwhelming her. A while later, we find ourselves in an apartment where a blonde girl is asking her friends if it's true that Huijin is moving overseas. One of the other girls confirms that it's true, saying she was shocked when she first heard but has no idea why they're leaving suddenly, as Huijin never mentioned anything about moving abroad. The blonde girl then turns to Chicken Shake, who is sitting silently and seems too preoccupied with herself to respond. One of the girls snaps her out of her reverie and asks if she has nothing to say about it. This rattles the timid girl to her core, and the blonde girl asks her directly if Huijin is really moving overseas, figuring that since they're in the same class, Chicken Shake might know more about it. Timidly and nervously, the girl confirms that it's true, and that their teacher announced it to the class earlier. The blonde girl then asks if she tried reaching Huijin directly. Chicken Shake admits she did, but Huijin didn't pick up the call. Hearing this, all the girls start to believe it might be true. Meanwhile, Chicken Shake nervously checks her phone, biting her nails in anxiety. The last message she got from Huijin was that her mother was going to take care of our boy, and ever since, Chicken Shake has been freaking out, wondering if Huijin's sudden move has anything to do with him. Just then, Huijin herself arrives in the room, looking absolutely furious. The girls are shocked to see her, and Huijin just takes a seat on the sofa, grumbling about how she barely managed to sneak out of the house. The girls ask Huijin if she's really moving overseas. Frustrated, Huijin grabs her head and says it just happened, but she explains she'll be back after 1 semester. We then flash back into the past, where her dad told her to spend a semester abroad, promising he'd sort everything out by the time she gets back, because he doesn't want those videos going public either. She keeps this part to herself though, and the other girls just laugh and tease her, saying she's going to enjoy her vacation. The blonde sneers, clearly annoyed by their attitude. Another girl asks why the sudden move and if Gisu is going too. Huijin simply says it's a family matter, and she doesn't need to go into details. The redhead girl then asks about Daeon and her brother, curious about how things went and if Gisu managed to beat our boy or not. Huijin tells them not to ask, insisting that Gisu probably has handled the situation already. However, we all know that she just doesn't want to admit that her brother and his lackeys got thoroughly defeated by our boy, as it would be too humiliating. She grows even more agitated thinking about how pleased Daeon will be to see her leaving the school. This irritation sparks an idea in her mind, and she decides to mess with Daeon one last time, asking her friends to help with her plan. Her friends question whether it's really necessary, and even Chicken Shake jumps in shock and expresses her reluctance. But Huijin insists they should consider how cocky Daeon will be without anyone to bully her. She plans to deal with Daeon before she leaves Korea, wanting to make sure she gets her revenge. Chicken Shake grows increasingly anxious and terrified as Huijin continues to reveal her twisted plan. Huijin gets cocky, boasting that Daeon's grandpa is a security guard somewhere, and she plans to have her mom get him fired. She believes this will teach Daeon a lesson not to mess with anyone from the Kim family. This is seriously messed up. Daeon is just an innocent girl, and Huijin's plotting is enough to make anyone sick. But before this trash woman can act on her disturbing thoughts, her face goes pale when she sees a figure standing before her, cloaked in a hoodie with a mask over their face. It doesn't take long for her to recognize that it must be Jin. However, Jin pulls a classic Uno card move and asks her who Jin is, questioning how she can be so sure when he's wearing a mask and she can't see his face. He casually explains that he's just here to check if everyone's having a good time and is quite pleased to see that everyone from the karaoke room video is present. One of the girls starts trembling and asks what he's talking about. That's when the boy reminds them he's referring to the place where they all filmed his sister getting beaten up. Huijin's face turns ashen as she realizes he might have been there waiting all along just to mess with her. Chicken Shake is visibly sweating and trembling, clearly aware of what might come next. The other two girls just sit there, utterly silent. The boy starts to shut the door, asking why no one's singing, since he thought everyone here loved to scream along to loud music. With that, he slams the door shut, leaving us with no clue about what he might do next. The scene takes us to the hospital, where the Kim family is gathered. The father, In-by Kim, is clearly annoyed, asking where Huijin went. Her brother explains that she stepped out to say goodbye to her friends. In-by's irritation grows as he asks why she left when she was supposed to stay put until they had everything sorted out. Just then, a guy bursts into the room, quickly turning on the TV and telling his master he needs to see what's going on. On the screen, it's clear that our boy has already made the videos of what Huijin did go viral. The footage is spreading fast, and the situation is quickly becoming a public spectacle. The entire Kim family falls silent as they watch the news. The reporter continues to drop bombshells, revealing that there are dozens of violent videos circulating, with many more incidents likely unrecorded. Civic groups and politicians are now proposing a special bill to bring the culprits to justice. Gisu starts to lose his composure, and the reporter adds that the nation is especially appalled by the revelation that the culprits are the children of candidate In-by Kim. It's clear that the father is in deep trouble, and it's all thanks to his outrageous wife who pushed everything to this point. Given Huijin's plan to make our grandpa jobless, it seems they're getting exactly what they deserve. We cut back to our boy being grilled by Mr. Cha, who demands to know why he went ahead with his plan when he had already come to terms with the Kim family. Our boy's mind flashes back to the past, where we find him learning all about the Kim family's deep political connections. He reveals that it was highly unlikely everything would have gone smoothly, so he did what he felt had to be done. In the present, he admits he did not honor the agreement they had. Mr. Cha questions whether he really thinks the Kim family would just let him walk away. Our boy confidently asserts that he's probably the last thing on their minds right now. It seems our boy might be right. The reporter continues to drop more bombshells, revealing recent evidence of In-by Kim's involvement in money laundering, bribery, and election fraud. The evidence is so damning that even his fellow party members are calling for a strict investigation, with everyone trying to cut ties to avoid any damage to their party. As soon as Mr. Kim hears this, he slumps down on the bed like a lifeless doll. Back with Mr. Cha, he seems to suspect that our boy has dug up some data about his past as well, and Cha does not want to get exposed to the law just like the Kim family. So he quickly asks who our MC really is. Our boy responds simply, saying he's just an average teenager. Mr. Cha smirks at this ridiculous remark, noting that nothing about Jin is average. The scene shifts to the classroom, where the girls are feeling anxious and blushing as they see Jin. They whisper among themselves, trying to muster the courage to approach him and ask him something, but everyone remains too shy to make a move. As Jin sits lost in thought, his phone rings. It's Daeon, letting him know that she can walk home by herself today and telling him to take a break and hang out with his friends. Jin is puzzled by the concept of hanging out and wonders how to go about it. Just then, one of his friends, Young-chan, pops up and greets him. As Young-chan sits down, he asks if he is busy today. Our boy remains silent, which prompts Young-chan to remember that Jin always walks his little sister home, so he must be busy after school. But not surprisingly, Jin tells his friend that he's actually free today. Young-chan's face lights up with happiness, and they plan to hang out after school. However, Young-chan's enthusiasm quickly fades when he hears an unpleasant voice. As the scene zooms out, we see these two beta bullies of the class step forward. They both reveal that they've heard the news and know that Jin is the reason Gisu Kim is moving abroad. Youngchan is totally shocked by the news, and the other students lounging around are equally caught off guard. The bullies spill the beans that even though Gisu and his sister were all set to move abroad, they're stuck now because their whole family's in hot water after the info leak. Our boy jumps in to set things straight, telling the bullies they've got it all wrong. But Jae-hyung chimes in, saying there's no need for modesty because everyone knows our boy trashed Gisu and his crew at their hideout a couple of days ago. Hyukjin backs him up, explaining that Jin took them all out by himself, and now everyone's saying Gisu is too embarrassed to show his face at school. He's itching to hear just how badly our boy must have beaten Gisu to make him leave the country altogether. Youngchan is finally convinced that Jin is actually a skilled fighter and that his performance that day wasn't just luck. Hyukjin leans in and says, now that they won't have to deal with that jerk anymore, he's itching to throw a party, so he invites our boy to celebrate after school today. Jae-hyung agrees, adding that they've been in the class for days without really spending time together, and he suggests they show our boy around the area. But our guy flatly turns them down, saying he already has plans for today. Naturally, the bullies are puzzled and ask what he's up to. With a pleasant smile, Jin replies that he's planning to hang out with Youngchan. That's when Jae-hyung starts creeping in with his disgusting grin, leaning toward Youngchan and saying he'll join their hangout. Hyukjin also leans closer to the terrified guy and expresses his desire to join in as well. After forcefully making Youngchan agree, they start to walk away, saying they'll meet up later. Our boy quickly asks his friend if he really wants to let these goons join in, and the poor guy stutters a positive response with a pale face. The teacher finally arrives in the classroom, and she's brought along 2 transfer students. One of them is a plain-looking guy, but the real standout is a stunning beauty with striking black hair. Youngchan's eyes immediately light up at the sight of her, and our boy quickly asks if he knows who they are. Youngchan explains that everyone knows this girl. She's Yeona Sin, and her grandpa owns SW Corporation, the biggest company in Korea. The guy next to her is Seokju Ko, and there are rumors that he's been with her since they were kids and is seen as her associate and bodyguard. The teacher notes that since everyone's familiar with these two, she won't waste time on introductions. She reveals that both of them have been studying in the US for the past 2 years and will be joining the class starting today. The beta lackeys don't seem too thrilled about these 2 newcomers in the classroom. With just Jin before, their chances to rule the classroom were slim to none, but now, with these 2 around, they're not so sure they can even think about bullying anyone. Meanwhile, Youngchan was curious about the 2 extra desks in the class, but it's clear now who they're for. He can't help but think Yeona looks even more stunning than he remembered. Even the students in the class can't keep their eyes off her. As Seokju behind the lady walks forward, he could not help but notice our boy, and their eyes lock for a moment. Yeona too can't resist but glances at him while she is walking past him. Once both of the newcomers take their seats, Seokju tells Yeona that our boy wasn't in the evaluation report he received a week ago, and he wants to double-check. Yeona is intrigued and glances at our boy once more, and we can tell she is clearly curious about him. Our boy notices Yeona glancing at him, and when he looks back, he finds her smiling. However, he just turns his gaze away again, which seems to irritate her since she didn't get a reciprocating smile. Meanwhile, Youngchan continues their conversation and asks if he has any particular place he wants to go. Jin says he's okay with anywhere, so Youngchan suggests hitting the game room. Well, it seems like the word gaming room triggers some memories for our boy, while his friends explain that it's nearby and just upgraded their PCs. That's when we flash back to the past, where we hear the authoritative tone of a senior telling a group of soldiers that they will begin today's portion of their practical life training program. He explains that there's one thing every Korean teenager must know, and that's the gaming room. This is the first time our boy has heard about the gaming room. The senior further explains that gaming rooms offer personal computers for a fee, and both students and adults can use them. Curious, our boy asks what people do there. The senior explains that while some users browse the internet or watch X-rated videos, most people are there to play games. For the average high school student, over 90% are playing some kind of computer game. The senior then introduces some of the most common games. First up is Legends of League, followed by Battle Royale. Back in the present, our boy reflects on how he can finally make use of the Major's intel. Meanwhile, Youngchan adds that they'll also grab some ramen at the game room and maybe check out Koinka afterward. Well, it seems like Koinka is yet another term our boy picked up during his military days while learning about practical life. The senior explains to him that high schoolers frequently visit coin karaoke, also known as Koinka. These establishments basically allow for sing-alongs with just a few coins. Major Kang tells our boy that he should prepare a few songs to sing in case he ends up going to one, and promises to send him a list of popular songs for kids his age to learn. As our guy starts brainstorming ideas and trying to remember some songs, his friend sits nervously nearby, wondering why Jin suddenly looks so serious. Once the bell rings, the students head out for the day, and that's when we see this hottie once again. And as usual, she is with her lackey. Apparently, they're discussing our boy, and discover that he transferred just a few days ago, is 18 years old, and happens to be Daeon Yu's older brother. Yona is surprised to learn that Daeon has a brother because she thought her only family was her grandpa. Seokju-ko agrees and explains that Daeon has been living with her paternal grandfather since her parents and brother died in a plane crash. Yona then asks how she still has a brother. Seokju-ko replies that it's hard to believe, but apparently, her deceased brother has suddenly come back to life just before they transferred to school. He suggests they should dig a little deeper into our boy's past. Meanwhile, it's gotten pretty late already, and we find our boy strolling alone. His phone keeps ringing with notifications from his friends, showing they had a blast at the gaming center. We flash back to the gaming club, where we see Hyokjin, our boy, Jae-hyung, and Young-chan all hanging out. Everyone is amazed by how Young-chan carried them through the game. Jae-hyung even asks about his rank, guessing it must be Diamond or Master. Their jaws drop when Young-chan timidly reveals that he's actually at Challenger rank. From that moment, their attitude toward Young-chan shifts completely. In the present moment, even our boy finds this sudden change odd as they keep chatting excitedly about Young-chan's impressive rank. As he's looking at his phone, his sister arrives. He quickly asks her what she's doing here. She explains that they ran out of garbage bags at home, so she went to get some, and she also picked up a few snacks. Our boy offers to carry the bags, but his sweet sister insists it's not necessary. She then asks if he was hanging out with his friends, and he confirms that he was. She feels a warm sense of relief, glad to see that he's made friends and that people aren't avoiding him because of the fight. When she asks where he went, he bluntly replies that he went to the game room. Well, it seems like this isn't exactly what she expected to hear, as she thought he might have developed different interests after living overseas for so long. Curious about her own experiences at school, he asks how things have been for her. She pauses for a moment before responding that school hasn't been this fun in years. She then asks if he also had something to eat. He nods, saying they had a blast at the game room, where every kind of snack was available. He then asks her about her plans, and she mentions that she's waiting for Grandpa to come home so they can eat together. Our boy then asks if he can join them, which confuses her since she thought he'd already eaten. He awkwardly admits that he's still a bit hungry. We already know that our boy just wants to have some quality family time. When they get home, there's a spread of delicious food laid out on the table, and they all seem to be having a great time eating together. It does seem odd that Grandpa only works a security job, yet they have such a variety of food every day. It's a bit of a mystery how they manage that. As they're having a good time eating together, our boy's thoughts drift back to his mercenary days. After a moment, he shakes off the nostalgia and is back to smiling. Just then his phone rings. It's Major Kang calling. The Major reminds him that he should just call him bro instead of using his rank. The Major asks how things are going, and our boy says he's doing well. But when the Major probes about his school life, there's an awkward silence on the line in response. Getting a bit anxious, the Major quickly asks if our boy has killed someone. Jin quickly says no, but admits he did run into some trouble that was quickly sorted out. The senior lets out a sigh of relief, and our boy reassures him that everything is fine now, and there's nothing to worry about. Kang is relieved and reminds our boy that they're always there for him. In response, Jin promises he won't forget that. The next day at school, we see the trio in class, but our boy is noticeably missing, and Young-chan seems a bit awkward among the two bullies. Jae-hyung starts asking odd questions. Curiously, he asks who they think would win in a fight between Jin and Seokju-ko. Hyokjin points out that while Jin is good, he probably couldn't beat Seokju-ko, who's been training in combat since he was a kid. To him, our boy seems like an amateur in comparison. Jae-hyung agrees, adding that Seokju-ko is one tough motherfudger. Young-chan then asks if it's true that Seokju-ko fought against 20 dudes and won. Blonde quickly corrects him, saying it was actually 30 guys. The number leaves Young-chan momentarily stunned. He even forget to breathe for a second. Brownhead explains that when a group of street thugs was harassing Yona Sin, Seokju-ko took them all out. He says it started with 10 guys, but they kept coming. By the time 30 guys showed up, Seokju was still going strong. He walked off without a scratch while the 30 thugs were left unconscious on the street, like discarded toys. The timid boy then asks about the rumors he heard, about Seokju catching the kidnappers who took Yona. He's heard that the people behind it were all retired soldiers. The blonde quickly confirms that the story about Seokju-ko catching the kidnappers is probably true as well. He insists that Jin doesn't stand a chance against Seokju because he is on a whole other level. It's sometimes hilarious to think that teenagers in these Korean manhwa are taking down entire gangs single-handedly, making the government and all those intelligence and law enforcement departments look like they're just wasting taxpayer money. In the meantime, our boy suddenly stops in the corridor when he comes face to face with Seokju. Without wasting any time, Seokju asks him straightforwardly what he's doing here. Confused, our boy makes it clear that he doesn't understand what he is getting at. Seokju simplifies his approach and asks why he is lying about his identity. He mentions that he's heard our boy had a hand in Gisu and Huijin Kim moving away. Jin clarifies that he did have some beef with Gisu, but he had nothing to do with their departure. That is when Seokju points out that he checked with the school our boy supposedly attended overseas, and they've never heard of him. Things seem to be heating up, but before we get our boy's response to Seokju, the scene shifts to Daeyeon. She's approached by Yeona, the stunning girl from earlier. After a while, the two ladies are catching up, and Daeyeon mentions she didn't know Yeona was back in Korea. Yeona explains that she just started school the day before and is actually in her brother's homeroom class. Daeyeon perks up in surprise. Yeona then points out that she doesn't remember Daeyeon mentioning having a brother before. Daeyeon explains that everyone thought her brother had died in the crash with her parents 10 years ago, but he survived. They only found out about his survival about 6 months ago. The scene flashes back to the past again. Daeyeon has just returned home and finds her grandfather frozen in place while holding the telephone receiver. Tears are streaming down his face as he reveals the shocking news that Jin is alive. This revelation leaves Daeyeon stunned, and it's how she learns about her brother's survival. Back in the present, Yeona asks why no one didn't know about her brother all these years if he was alive but didn't reach out. Daeyeon explains that Jin lost his memory in the crash, and it was only recently that he started to regain some of it, and someone helped them locate and reconnect with him. Yeona, clearly skeptical, finds it hard to believe. Daeyeon confirms that Jin only has faint memories of having a grandfather and a younger sister. After the interrogation, Yeona flashes a pleasant smile and comments that their grandfather must have been overjoyed to get his grandson back. Yeona comments that their grandfather is indeed overjoyed, explaining that after receiving the call, he cried for hours and then took time off work to enroll in cooking classes. He wanted to improve his Korean cooking skills, thinking that Jin might not have had much of that growing up. Yeona comments that their grandpa must really love his grandkids, and Daeyeon smiles, agreeing that he definitely does. But then Yeona throws a serious question her way, asking, is she absolutely sure Jin is her brother? Daeyeon looks a bit surprised but quickly gives a positive response, saying Jin is definitely her brother, and they even took a DNA test to be sure. Our girl then asks why Yeona is so interested in her brother. This question clearly catches Yeona off guard. Since she is not sure what to say, she quickly asks, almost frantically, if her brother has a girlfriend. We then cut back to our boy, who asks Seokju what the hell he's talking about. Seokju repeats his question, asking what's so important about this school that our boy had to forge his records just to be here. Jin responds by asking if he's being accused of having fake records. Seokju confirms this, saying they must be fake because, according to his research, Jin never lived in that city, and the school he claims to have attended doesn't even have a record of him. Our boy then asks about the proof, and reminds Seokju that if he's claiming the records are fake, there must be some evidence to back up the claim. Seokju is momentarily at a loss for how to counter this question. He discovered the discrepancy by digging around and talking to people connected to the school overseas, but he has no tangible proof. He's amazed at how Jin handles the situation without flinching or showing any sign of being startled. Then, our boy finally asks why Seokju is running a background check on him. In response, the blackhead explains that he can't just sit around and watch a suspicious kid who might pose a threat to his mistress. A silence falls between them for a moment, but then our boy finally answers, saying he came back home. Seokju is baffled by this vague response, so our boy clarifies that he was asked what he came here for, and his answer is simply that he returned from overseas for his family. With that, our boy starts to leave. Seokju stares after him with skeptical eyes, thinking that since he already suspects our boy has forged his records, it won't be long before he figures out his true identity. Once the class begins, we see Jaehyung quietly immersed in playing video games, while the blondie scrolls through his phone idly. Our boy Jin notices that both Seokju and Yeona are absent from class. He's intrigued by how quickly these two, having just transferred yesterday, managed to gather so much information about him in less than a day. When the bell rings, the beta bullies approach Youngchan, inviting him to play games and push ranks. They also invite Jin, but he declines, mentioning it's his grandpa's birthday today. The bullies decide to hang out themselves, and Youngchan is on board with that plan. Meanwhile, we're back with the Black Beauty, where Seokju is filling her in on the situation. He's convinced that Jin has definitely forged all his records and even questions the authenticity of the DNA test. Seokju further mentions that his research dug up some pretty rough stuff about his sister, Daeyeon. Apparently, she's been getting seriously bullied by Gisu Kim and his sister for the past 2 years. When Yeona asks just how bad it was, Seokju says it's enough to make anyone wonder how she endured the bullying all these years. He explains that the videos of her assault weren't exactly publicized, but he is pretty sure that the assault she faced was just as serious. Yeona's pretty blown away and can't help but think about how messed up kids these days can be. Seokju adds that Jin's already knocked out Gisu Kim and his crew twice, and saved her sister from the bullying. Yona chuckles to herself, thinking it's kinda sweet that her long-lost brother comes back from the dead and takes out her bullies, while Yona's own siblings only ever seem to want to get rid of her. Yona's curiosity gets the best of her as she starts piecing things together. She points out that if Jin had really come to school with the intent to target her, it doesn't make sense that he'd be so upfront about it. A smart person would have stayed under the radar. Seokju agrees, noting that someone with a real plan would have kept a low profile. Yona's mind starts racing once again, and she asks if Jin might have some kind of ulterior motive related to Daeyeon's family. She brings up the insurance money from the plane crash. Seokju then reveals that the grandpa received it but hasn't used it, making it grow over the years. Furthermore, Grandpa returned the share of money which he got for Jin's death, since he was alive. But there's still a substantial amount left, so there is still a possibility that he might be after the money. Yona connects the dots and highlights that if Jin might actually be after the money, then it could mean Daeyeon is in danger from her own brother. The scene shifts back to the grocery store where our duo can be seen shopping, and as usual, Jin is drawing a lot of attention from the girls around. While they browse for items, Daeyeon takes a deep breath and admits she hesitates to ask. But her curiosity is overwhelming, so she desperately wants to know what his life was like after the crash. Our boy remains quiet for a moment, and the girl starts apologizing frantically, saying he doesn't have to answer if it's uncomfortable. But he just smiles and reassures her that it's okay. He begins his story, explaining that he was deeply traumatized and could barely think straight. He did whatever he could to survive in a place where he didn't even speak the language, staying constantly busy just to get by. The girl falls silent, absorbing this heavy revelation. Then she starts to chuckle and asks if he was too busy to have a girlfriend during that time. He nods, agreeing with a laugh. She then reveals that she was surprised to learn he's in the same homeroom as Yeona, something Yeona herself had mentioned to her. Jin is surprised to hear this, and quickly asks her if she knows her. Daeyeon explains that Yeona was really nice to her before she moved to the US, and she had missed her a lot. So, when she saw her again today, it was a happy reunion. Then, with a playful grin, Daeyeon reveals that Yeona even asked her if he has a girlfriend. And of course, our boy just gives a somewhat typical reaction upon hearing this. Later, back at home, the birthday celebrations are in full swing. The siblings present their grandpa with a gift. As he unwraps it, he discovers a high-quality wallet inside, and his face lights up with joy. He's genuinely touched and feels a bit guilty for the low pocket money they have, thinking they must have spent more than they could afford. But his granddaughter just smiles warmly and reassures him that they had more than enough to get him a gift. And besides, it wasn't too expensive. The old man's hands tremble with happiness as he holds the wallet. With his voice thick with emotion, he tells them that the biggest gift he could ever ask for was already given to him when Jin came back home safe and sound. Nothing could ever top that. Suddenly, the sound of a phone ringing grabs everyone's attention. Daeyeon rushes to her room to answer it. While she's chatting on the phone, Jin tries to eavesdrop quietly. That's when he hears the girl mention she's heading out to the convenience store for a bit. The old man questions why she's going out at this late hour, and it turns out she is heading out because Yeona stopped by for a quick chat. Well, we can tell that Jin definitely senses something is off. Later that night, Jin is digging into his computer, trying to uncover all he can about SW Corporation, which Yeona's family owns. He's curious why Yeona seems so interested in him, and why they're running a background check on a random transfer student like him. Jin reflects on his conversation with Seokju when suddenly he hears a call from his grandfather. When he steps into the living room, his grandpa mentions he's heading out for a bit too. Our boy asks if he's going after Daeyeon, and the old man kinda agrees. He adds that he just needs some fresh air. Jin smiles and tells his grandpa to stay put, and he'll go check on her instead. But the old man insists on going out by himself. Jin then reminds him about the early job he has in the morning, and finally, our boy decides to head out on his own. Later, we see both girls chatting away about their studies and other topics. Yeona shares her experiences studying abroad and suggests that Daeyeon consider studying outside as well. In response, Daeyeon admits she never really thought about it before. When Yeona asks why, Daeyeon explains that it costs a lot, and she'd need to be away for several years, which means she wouldn't get to be with her grandpa for a while. Yeona finds this a bit strange, so Daeyeon further elaborates, explaining that she doesn't want her grandpa to be alone, especially since he's not in the best of health these days. However, she's grateful that her brother is always around, as his presence really helps her feel better. Meanwhile, Yeona's having a hard time bringing up the real reason she came over, since Daeyeon seems to really trust her brother. She's not sure how to bring it up without causing problems. We then flash back a bit, where Seokju tells Yeona that someone from the supposed overseas school confirmed that Daeyeon's brother never attended there. They even looked at his photo and verified he was never a student. Plus, the current resident at his false address gave solid proof that he never lived there. Seokju's also checking out some other leads, so Yona decides she needs to meet with Daeon to discuss what they've found. But Seokju reminds her that while they have proof the records were forged, they can't yet prove that he isn't Daeon's real brother. Yona's concerned because the records from the decade he was missing are basically fake. Since she's now living with him, it's a big deal that can't be ignored. She thinks Daeon deserves to know the truth about the records and wants to at least fill her in on what they've found so far. In the present, Yona is struggling to bring up the main topic she came here to discuss, even though it's her primary reason for visiting. Just as Daeon expresses how happy she is to be chatting like this after a long time, we also see our boy making his way toward the both of the girls. However, Seokju steps in front of him, but Jin simply tries to walk past him, but the newcomer quickly tells him to stay put. In Seokju's mind, he's sure Jin must be here because he's worried they're going to share everything with Daeon. So he quickly blocks our boy's path and tells him that the both girls are just catching up and asks him to give them some time alone. Suddenly, a high-speed Volkswagen comes barreling toward them. Before anyone can react, the car slams into both of the boys, knocking them down like bowling pins. They hit the ground, as the Volkswagen screeches to a halt right where the two girls are sitting. Jin tries to stand up, but it's clear he's severely injured, especially around his head. As he struggles to focus, his groggy eyes catch sight of some shady people from the van trying to abduct both of the girls. Without wasting a second, Jin starts sprinting like a madman, but his efforts are in vain. The kidnappers have already taken the girls, and there's no way he can outrun a car, so they're left behind, helpless. The both of them quickly look at each other and, in their anger, grab each other by the collars. But after exchanging a few heated words, they realize neither of them is behind the abduction, so they let go. The black-haired guy immediately pulls out his phone and calls the security team at SW Corporation, urgently reporting that Yona has been kidnapped. He tells them to track her down using the security footage. Meanwhile, Jin starts walking off, and the black-haired guy quickly asks him where he's going and if he's actually not behind all this. Jin simply replies that he doesn't have time to argue with anyone. Seokju points out that SW Corporation's security is already on it and will find the girls soon. Until then, Jin will need to stick with him so they can confirm his identity. But our boy makes it clear that he's going to find his sister, and if Seokju wants to follow him, he can gladly do so. Seokju starts to get the sense that Jin might not be involved after all. But then our boy suddenly stops and humorously asks Seokju if he brought his car with him. The scene shifts to the bustling heart of the city's entertainment district. Inside one of the pubs, Mr. Cha is sitting back, puffing on a cigarette and enjoying his laid-back time. Just then, his lackey informs him that someone is here to see him. When Mr. Cha turns around, he sees Jin standing there. The scene then shifts to Saw Corporation, where we see a regal-looking lady sitting in her chair. I can tell she's definitely Yeona's sister because she looks just as gorgeous, with her flowing black hair. Suddenly, an assistant bursts into the room. The woman looks a bit annoyed at this sudden intrusion, and wants to know why he didn't bother to ask for permission before barging in. The assistant quickly reports that Yona has been kidnapped. The news surprises the lady, but surprisingly, she doesn't seem too troubled by it. In fact, she starts to smile faintly and seems to think that the rumors must be true after all. Not entirely sure what she's referring to, but let's roll with it. She then asks if their grandfather is still planning to go after the company. The assistant states that he is not sure, so she leans back, hoping that if he continues to pursue them without backing down, Yuna will eventually die. It's definitely something she's looking forward to. The scene transitions back to the pub, where we pick up the story with our main character meeting with Cha, and Seokju is also tagging along with him. Seokju already seems to know about Cha as he recognizes him from their database, and is curious about how our boy knows this gangster. Cha starts by asking what our boy wants. In response, Jin simply says he needs some intel. Cha lights up another cigarette and scoffs, asking why he would bother to help him. Our boy cuts to the chase, revealing that the granddaughter of Saw Corporation has been kidnapped. Well, that is something Cha definitely was not expecting to hear. However, he quickly brushes it off, saying it's not their problem and that they don't deal with such issues because it would be incredibly risky to mess with Saw Corporation. Our boy asks if Cha has any leads to offer. But the mafia boss makes it clear that there's no reason for him to share anything, especially since he's already in a difficult situation thanks to our boy. That's when our boy reveals that his younger sister was also taken along with Saw's granddaughter. Cha finally realizes he's in a tough spot now, as messing with our boy's sister is like messing with John Wick's dog. Both are equally dangerous. So he then starts explaining, and mentions that some people speaking broken Korean were asking around for untraceable warehouses, as well as for burners, cars, and a few extra hands. The offer was tempting, but he turned them down because dealing with this kind of trouble isn't something you can easily wash off. He adds that he's heard another crew took the job, and all he knows is they're working out of Incheon. That's all the info he's got. It wouldn't be surprising if Seokju had already figured out who's behind this mess. Meanwhile, our boy starts to walk away after giving a final thanks. But then, the mafia boss tosses his phone to our boy and tells him to save his number. Jin cluelessly looks at him, puzzled about why he'd need his number. The mafia boss gets a bit agitated and clarifies that he'll need it to contact him once he digs into the warehouse for more info. With that, our boy starts entering his digits. He also asks if the bike outside the door belongs to him. Cha knows exactly what our boy is planning to do with it, so he feels hesitant to respond. But eventually, my guy takes the heavy bike, and before leaving, he tells Seokju figure his own way out to get there, because he's taking the bike. Seokju questions whether he is going to trust this shady half-baked info, and going to chase those kidnappers based on that. Our boy explains that he doesn't have time to waste, because Yeona will probably be safe until the kidnappers get what they want, but there's no telling what they might do with Daeon. Seokju gets the logic behind Jin's reasoning and stays quiet, and he can tell that he is a quick and sharp thinker. Seokju then tells him that he's already passed the info to his security team and will follow him in his car. Jin just gives a cold response, saying Seokju can do whatever he wants. With that, he puts on his helmet, revs up the gas pedal, and speeds off through the streets. The scene then switches back to the girls, where we see Daeon waking up with a headache and, as she becomes aware of her surroundings, Yeona quickly apologizes, saying it's probably her fault that Daeon got dragged into this. Daeon's mind starts to recall the recent event, and she is shocked to remember that they have been kidnapped, and Yeona sadly confirms it, adding that she didn't expect this to happen so soon after returning to Korea. Just then, the kidnappers arrive, and Yeona coldly asks them why they had been abducted. One of the kidnappers snaps at her to shut up and stay quiet, and it'll be over soon enough. Of course, it does not take her long to realize that these filthy people must be planning to use her as leverage against her grandfather. One of the lackeys then asks the boss what they should do with Daeon, who was kidnapped simply because she was with Yeona. Unsurprisingly, the boss decides she is useless to them and orders his lackeys to get rid of her. But Yeona immediately speaks up, insisting she won't let them harm Daeon. The boss asks what she can possibly do, and Yeona threatens that she'll bite her tongue and bleed to death, making it impossible for them to use her as a bargaining chip. The mafia boss finds it hilarious that she's willing to risk her life for someone she barely knows. He further taunts her, urging her to go ahead and try biting her tongue. Well, the mafia boss should have been more careful with his words because Yeona doesn't hesitate and bites her tongue, leaving blood pouring from her mouth. The boss yells in surprise, while the other lackey watches in silence, clearly startled to see her steel-like guts. The boss quickly stands up and tells her that her guts have bought her some time. The lackeys ask what the next order is. The boss tells them to get rid of Daeon later and instructs them to stuff her mouth shut so she can't make any noise. The scene then flashes back to our boy and Seokju. It looks like they've arrived at the location Mr. Cha mentioned. Seokju points out that the location seems legit because SW security tracked the minivan footage to this area. As our boy starts to move forward, Seokju tells him to stop and wait for backup, since he sent their coordinates to SW security and they should arrive soon. But our boy reminds him that Daeon doesn't have much time left, so he gotta make it quick. There's no room for argument, so they proceed forward and spot a bunch of goons patrolling the area. Suddenly, our boy leaps over one of the goons, grabs him by the throat, and starts choking him out. The lackey eventually loses consciousness, and our boy quietly drags him into the shadows, adding him to a pile of other goons he's already taken down. Seokju is also helping out, and he's blown away by Jin's ability to take down opponents silently. He's so impressed that he asks Jin who the heck he is. Jin just casually replies that he's an average student at the same school. The scene shifts to SW Corporation, where we finally meet the big boss, the grandpa of the company. He's getting a report from the black-suited guy about the kidnappers' demands. The guy explains that the kidnappers want SW Corp to cancel their recent contract. If SW Corp doesn't respond within an hour or refuses to comply, they'll kill Miss Yeona. The old man asks about the security details, and the black-suited guy says that SW security will reach the location where Yeona is being held within 50 minutes. Back at the shady location, we hear two lackeys chatting. They're curious about their client and why they're making them do this kidnapping. One of them says their boss has already made it clear that it's none of their business and they should just follow orders. Just then, one of the lackeys gets a smack right on the head and crumples to the ground. He turns around, wincing, to see Jin, who's already taken out the other guy. After they're done with the goons, Jin asks his fellow how many he's knocked out. Seokju says the guy he left behind makes it 5 in total. Jin then does a quick mental tally and realizes they've taken down 14 guys, meaning the enemy have got plenty of muscle and resources. Seokju is blown away that Jin managed to take down 9 guys while he struggled with just 5. Finally, Jin asks the black head who's pulling the strings, The guy lets out a heavy sigh and says they don't really know. Apparently these kinds of incidents pop up now and then. This kind of thing also happened when they were in America. He never thought it would happen again so soon after coming back to Korea, and feels like he should have been more on the ball. Jin points out that the real mastermind must be with Yona right now, so he decides to push deeper into the location. Before he moves on, Jin asks Seokju if he'll be okay. Seokju looks puzzled and asks, "Okay? About what?" Jin explains that he was pretty banged up when that van ran over him. The blackhead just shrugs it off, saying our boy should focus on his own injured leg instead. Suddenly, someone starts shouting, asking where all the lookouts went. Another one jokes that maybe everyone went to take a dump. But then another questions why they'd all need to take a dump together. As they walk forward, they finally spot their guys lying unconscious. Before the confused goons can figure out what's happening, Jin delivers a brutal knee smash to one's face. Jin then turns to the thin-mustached goon, grabs his hand, and delivers a savage kick to his leg, followed by a brutal smack to his head. With that, both goons are out cold. Jin decides to split up, but before they part ways, Seokju calls out to him. When our boy turns around, Seokju says that once they're out of this mess, he owes Jin an official apology. Back with the boss, he's hearing the commotion outside and tells his lackeys to check it out. We see our ladies with their faces covered in clothes to keep them from screaming. As Jin walks down, he runs into the lackeys. The guy in the mask points out that he has seen Seokju in pictures, so he can confirm that this brat definitely is not him. He then questions our boy how he came inside. Jin stays silent in response, and he quickly figures out these are the guys behind the kidnapping. Meanwhile, the masked guy orders his lackeys to just get rid of this brat. Just before we see Jin take out the goons, the scene cuts to Seokju, who's hiding in the storeroom, looking around cautiously. There, he finds both ladies tied up, and thankfully, no one else is around, so he figures they must all be out looking for Jin. He sneaks over to the girls, quickly pulls the mask off Yona's face, and she asks if the security team has arrived. Seokju tells her they're on their way. Yona is shocked to hear this and asks how he found them out here. That's when the mafia boss chimes in, and he is thoroughly pleased to hear that the security team won't be arriving anytime soon. The boss then says he must be Seokju from SW Corporation, and he's heard a lot about him. He adds that this brat has been quite the pain, always lurking around Yona and ruining their plans. The mafia boss makes it clear he has no clue how Seokju found their hideout, but he's certain it wasn't smart to come here alone without backup. One of the lackeys suddenly lunges at Seokju, but my guy sidesteps the attack and throws a punch of his own. However, this lackey isn't a pushover. He dodges the punch and quickly retaliates. Seokju realizes this guy is tougher than the goons they took down outside, and he's having a hard time keeping up. But then, Seokju lands a brutal whack and follows up with a devastating punch to the lackey's gut, leaving him doubled over in pain. To finish things off, Seokju delivers a powerful leg swing, and the lackey finally looks like he's down for the count. Just when we think it's over, the thug tries to swing back in retaliation, but Seokju meets him with a devastating knee smash to the back, and the guy quickly starts to crumble. The scar-faced boss notes that he knew Seokju had been trained from a young age, but he didn't realize he was this impressive. Even the two girls are shocked by what they're witnessing. But the mafia boss isn't here for a duel of pride. With those words, the lackey pulls out a blade and starts slashing at Seokju, landing several brutal cuts across his body. The boss grins under his mask, saying he didn't expect this brat to fight empty-handed, which makes dealing with him a lot easier. The lackey charges at Seokju again with the dagger and begins swinging left and right like a madman. Seokju does his best to dodge, but he's still taking deep, painful cuts that leave him struggling to move. The boss pulls out his own dagger and starts juggling it in the air, clearly enjoying himself as he eyes the girls. As soon as Seokju sees this, he immediately knows Daeon is in serious trouble. The poor girl is already terrified, just imagining what's about to happen. Before Seokju can react, the bastard throws his dagger straight at her, aiming to end her life. But at the last second, Yona leaps in front of Daeon, and just as the dagger is about to hit, Seokju jumps in front of both girls, taking the blade straight into his back. The mafia boss scoffs at Seokju, mocking him as a pitiful bastard who's only good for the empty praises people give him. He then orders his lackeys to leave Yona alone and kill the other two. The lackeys quickly agree, and begin to walk forward to carry out the order. Suddenly, everyone hears the door creak open, and all eyes turn to see Jin making a badass entrance after taking down the goons and leaving them sprawled on the ground. Back at the club, Gangster Cha is there with his lackeys. They fill him in with the latest info, reporting that the Goshung cartel is behind the abduction. Cha is stunned by the ridiculous mistake the Goshung cartel made by getting involved with both Jin and SW Corporation. It was bound to backfire, considering how the cartel never digs into their clients before taking a job. One of the lackeys then asks Cha why he helped Jin. He further points out that Jin is the one who put them in a tight spot, and he's the one who exposed all the dirt on the Kim family they'd been keeping under wraps for years. Cha lets out a big sigh, saying he had no choice. He points out that he's just an old man who couldn't possibly take on a kid like Jin, and they can't just take revenge on him, especially since it was the Kim family who messed with him first. The lackeys then remarks that they don't have to help Jin either. Cha falls silent for a moment, then chuckles to himself, and further states that he had no choice but to help him since his sister was kidnapped. Back at the hideout, Jin makes his grand entrance. The lackey leader asks who this guy is, while Yona is stunned to see him. Diane is also shocked to see her brother, and when she mentions this out loud, the mafia boss overhears and realizes Jin is her brother. The boss bursts into laughter, nearly losing his breath. He finds it hilarious that he kidnapped a girl, and now her adorable brother is here trying to save her. He finds the whole situation quite amusing. Meanwhile, Jin turns to his sister and asks if she's okay. Daeon starts to cry, her tears streaming down as she begs her brother to just get out of here. Meanwhile, Yeona is heartbroken seeing these two siblings dragged into this mess because of her. She shouts at the lackey leader and offers to cooperate and tells them to let everyone else go in exchange for her cooperation. The mafia boss snaps back, asking why he should do her any favors. Yeona falls silent, realizing she doesn't have much leverage. Seokju, battered and bruised on the ground, watches Jin with a mix of admiration and amazement. Despite the tense situation they are in, Jin doesn't seem to flinch. Finally, the lackey leader orders his goons to take Jin down. He says they've already given him enough time and it's time to finish this. The lackey steps forward, dagger in hand, ready to take down Jin. But before he can make a move, Jin quickly deflects the attack, grabs the lackey's wrist, and drives the dagger into the lackey's own chest. The mafia boss is utterly stunned by this turn of events, and Seokju watches in shock as well. Daeon is also blown away by the sight of her brother's skill, and her brother quickly tells her to close her eyes. The girls quickly comply, shutting their eyes tightly. Jin then slashes the lackey, leaving deep, bloody gashes across his body. Blood splatters everywhere as the lackey collapses to the ground, covered in his own blood. Yeona is still trying to process what just happened, because it's all too overwhelming for her. Meanwhile, Seokju is left in absolute awe, realizing Jin isn't just swinging his knife around aimlessly. Instead, he has expertly severed the lackey's muscles and ligaments to neutralize him. The mafia boss is also quite amazed to see this, and comments that he doesn't seem like a brother at all, but more like a bodyguard. Jin keeps advancing toward him, and the boss retracts his previous statement quickly. He admits that Jin must be more than just a bodyguard because no ordinary kid could wield a knife like that and maintain such a cold gaze. He then brushes it off, saying it doesn't really matter because he's still planning to kill Jin anyway. He swings his dagger at him, but my guy quickly ducks down with a godspeed, and the boss keeps on swinging his dagger left and right. As the mafia boss lunges at Jin with his dagger, Jin easily blocks the attack with one hand and swings his own dagger at the boss. The boss, quick on his feet, steps back just in time to avoid the brutal hit. The two engage in a deadly dance of blades, each strike more vicious than the last. But this time, Jin's blade finds its mark, slicing through the boss's hand, leaving it temporarily useless. The mafia boss, now in pain and disbelief, demands to know who Jin really is. But my guy remains silent, his expression unreadable as he prepares for the next round. Without hesitation, the mafia boss charges at Jin again. This time, Jin effortlessly grabs his wrist, and with a quick motion, slashes through the boss's other hand. After delivering a few brutal cuts, Jin follows up with a crushing punch to the lackey's face, leaving him staggering backward with a bloodied nose. The mafia boss, now enraged and desperate, grabs a gun and aims it directly at Jin. But before he can pull the trigger, Jin throws his dagger with deadly accuracy. It embeds itself in the boss's shoulder, causing him to wince in pain. Seizing the moment, Jin launches himself at the boss with lightning speed. He delivers a devastating slap under the boss's chin, sending him crashing backward like a sack of potatoes. The mafia leader, now thoroughly beaten, collapses to the ground, his pride and power shattered. The others watch in stunned silence as Jin stands tall like a total badass, his presence alone making Yeona and Seokju tremble slightly. Jin steps forward, gently telling his sister to open her eyes. When she does, she sees him standing right there, a reassuring smile on his battered face. Without missing a beat, he tells her he's here to take her home. Yeona is momentarily shocked by his injured appearance and places her hand over his wounds, asking if he's okay. Jin, with a warm smile, reassures her that he's fine, despite the injuries. His calm behavior and comforting words make her emotions overflow, and she starts to cry uncontrollably. Jin does his best to comfort her, his own heart aching to see her so upset. Yeona is deeply moved by the compassion Jin shows for his sister, observing them with admiration. The next day, we are at SW Seoul Medical Center. Jin sits quietly in the corridor, his handsome face drawing the attention of passing nurses. His phone buzzes with a message from Jae-hyung, who's curious why Jin isn't at school. Jin replies that he's got an errand, and as he checks his messages, he sees his friends excitedly discussing their hangout and teasing him for missing out. Jin smiles as he reads his friends' messages, feeling a warm connection despite missing out. He leans back in his seat, letting his gaze drift around the corridor. His eyes fall on the room across from him, marked with a sign that reads, Psychiatry Department. The scene transitions to later that night. After Jin's intense battle with those Goonies, the police and authorities arrive at the scene. They round up all the criminals present, and doctors begin tending to Jin's sister. Yona approaches Jin and tells him that he should take his sister to the hospital, and promises to take care of the bill. Jin looks puzzled and asks why, given that his sister seems to be unharmed. Yona explains that even though Daeyeon doesn't appear injured at the moment, she may have sustained unseen injuries. The trauma of the situation is significant, and she emphasizes that it's crucial to ensure Daeyeon gets thorough medical attention. She also mentions that she recently discovered Gi-soo and Huijin Kim had been harassing Daeyeon, and while she's relieved they've been penalized, the resolution for the victims is still incomplete. She further explains that speaking with a counselor could be beneficial for Daeyeon after the traumatic experience. This is why we are waiting outside a psychiatrist's office rather than an emergency ward. As Daeyeon exits the room, she approaches Jin and asks if he's been waiting long. Jin reassures her that he just came here a few minutes ago. He then inquires about what the doctor said. In response, she explains that there's nothing serious to worry about. She will need to attend sessions once a week for a while, but overall, she's fine. Jin also shares that his own injuries are minor, just a few light bruises. The girl also let out a sigh of relief. She is relieved that he's okay. Jin's mind drifts back to how she was so emotional after being bullied, a tough reminder of everything she went through. She calls out to him, and he flashes her a smile, asking what's up. She just smiles back and says she forgot for a moment what she was going to ask. But inside her head, we can tell she's hesitant to bring up her question. The scene shifts back to earlier when the doctor was checking on her well-being. In the background, she overhears soldiers talking, completely amazed that a kid took down most of the kidnappers on his own. It just doesn't make sense to them. At that moment, Daeyeon is just as stunned by what the soldiers are saying. She's curious about how Jin can fight so well and what his life was like before coming back to Korea, but she can't make herself ask her any of these questions. As they walk down the corridor, they run into Yeona. The moment Daeyeon spots her, she lights up with happiness. Upon seeing each other, Yeona quickly asks her about how the therapy went. Daeyeon says it went well and mentions she heard Yeona covered the bill for her treatment, so she tells her she really didn't have to do that. Yeona waves it off, saying it's no big deal, and reminds her friend that she's the one who got her into this mess. She then apologizes to her sincerely. Daeyeon laughs it off, saying she's already apologized plenty. Besides, Yeona herself was a victim too. That's when Jin notices a massive bodyguard standing behind Yeona with a seriously intimidating look on his face. Despite the intense stare he is giving our boy, Jin remains totally unfazed. Yeona then turns to Jin and asks if he's had his checkup. Our boy quickly says yes, and Daeyeon chimes in, saying she had to drag him there. He only agreed to go after she threatened not to go to the hospital herself if he didn't. Daeyeon then asks about Seokju, and Yeona confirms he's in the same hospital. Daeyeon appears really eager to see him, and decides they should stop by before leaving. Even though she is excited about the visit, we can tell Jin's feelings are less clear. Still, they end up visiting Seokju, and Daeyeon makes sure to thank him for saving her from the blade. Seokju is a bit startled by her sudden gratitude and stutters, saying it's no big deal. She then asks Seokju if he's feeling better, and he replies that he's indeed feeling much better now. Meanwhile, Jin isn't too happy seeing his sister getting cozy with Seokju. He just stands there in silence, clearly uncomfortable. Even Yeona and her bodyguard notice that Jin seems to be troubled. Daeyeon then hopes Seokju recovers quickly. With that, they decide to leave. Yeona waves them goodbye, and they walk away through the main door. Once they're gone, the bodyguard is deep in thought, remarking how hard it is to believe that someone like this seemingly scrawny kid could take down a bunch of people at once. It's just unbelievable. Yeona chuckles and admits she's pretty amazed herself, but she isn't sure if it's something that would even surprise a pro like the bodyguard. The bodyguard shrugs and says it's not just about the kid beating up a group of guys, because there appears to be something way deeper about our boy. The bodyguard explains that our boy quickly and quietly neutralized over 10 guards, which is no easy feat. Even a trained pro would struggle to do that without some kind of backup. What's even more mind-blowing is that he didn't kill any of them. He just made them unfit for combat. And judging by the cuts on the 2 men found in the cargo container, his knife skills are insanely advanced, especially considering those guys were retired soldiers, not just a bunch of common thugs. He wraps it up by saying that, based on Seokju's report and the state of those thugs, It's pretty clear that Jin Yu is a highly trained pro with a ton of combat experience. Both Seokju and Daeon are completely blown away by this. A while later, we catch up with Daeon and Jin. Daeon quickly apologizes, feeling really ashamed that she always seems to need his help. Jin tells her she doesn't need to apologize at all, and that he should be the one thanking her. Daeon is startled to hear this, and Jin continues, saying he understands what it feels like to have a family now. You see, it is for the first time in his life he put someone else's safety above his own without any calculations. Something he'd never experienced before coming to this country. So, he's starting to get what family really means. We then see the same woman with short black hair again, and I will say it once again, she's likely Yona's sister, and she looks utterly distraught that Yona was rescued safely. The reporter details that there is suspicious rumor going around. He elaborates that while Seokju played a key role in the rescue, the exploits of another student who accompanied him were even more extraordinary. She asks how that's possible, and the reporter responds that even the chairman has taken an interest in this student, and we already know that this student is our boy, of course. The woman is shocked and wonders if these rumors might actually be true. We see Jin once again doing some hardcore pull-ups. As he works out, his mind flashes with images of the people he fought that day. Just as he's lost in the intensity of the exercise, Daeon knocks on the door and mentions that she's brought some fruit. While Daeon munches on the delicious fruit, Jin arrives and quickly asks his sister how she's feeling. She responds that she's already answered that question 1,000 times, and she's fine. Once Jin sits down, he notices something on Daeon's mind, so he asks her what's up. That is when she assures him that she does not hate him just because she saw him fighting and beating those guys brutally. She claims that it doesn't change how she views him. After all, he did all this just to save her, and she won't ask him about his past either. Daeon then gets somber, saying she was never able to tell Grandpa about any of the bad things that happened at school. She just wasn't ready to share it with him. But now, she feels more relaxed, as if she can open up about anything. Suddenly, her phone rings. It's Yona on the call, so she grabs the phone and heads to her room while still on the call. A while later, we see Yona sitting in front of Jin, who quickly tells him to take a seat as well. Jin sits down and asks why she wanted to see him. Yona explains that she wanted to apologize for putting Daeon in such a dangerous situation. Even though she's already apologized before, she wanted to say it to him personally. She explains that Seokju will also come to apologize in person once he's better. She also wants to thank Jin for saving her as well. Jin makes it clear that he only went to rescue Daeon, not Yona. She shrugs, saying that it doesn't change the fact that she was saved thanks to his intervention. Once she's finished, Jin asks if there's anything else she wanted to say. Yona admits that she also wanted to let him know that they will stop investigating his background, so she is hoping that he is not too mad that they tried to dig into his past. She then lets out a sigh, and explains that she couldn't ignore the fact that all of his documents were forged. After a recent kidnapping attempt in America, it raised some red flags for her. She's been in many tough situations since she was little because of who she is. She says that although they never figured out the truth behind his fake records, she won't be investigating it further. Jin starts to leave, saying if there's nothing else, he'll be on his way. Yona looks startled and asks if he could spare a couple of hours because her grandpa wants to meet him and thank him in person. While Jin is heading back, he replies that there's no need for that since he wasn't there to rescue her in the first place. Yona falls silent, and Jin heads home, walking down the dimly lit, gloomy alleys late at night. As he walks, we see a familiar person over that street. As the scene zooms in, we see that this is one of Mr. Cha's lackey, who has been brutally shot in the gut, and it does not take long for our boy to recognize who this man is. The man is barely holding on to his life, but makes sure to start berating Jin, blaming him for putting his gang in danger. He explains that they were already struggling after Jin exposed the Kim family. Then, their boss also helped our boy by tipping off the location of the Goseong cartel, which stirred up trouble between the Goseong cartel and their gang. Mr. Cha's turf is now under attack. His friends and lackeys have already been killed, and the Goseong cartel leader made sure to personally visit Dushik Cha. When Goseong finally faces off with Cha, he throws a verbal jab, asking why he doesn't just give up before making a fool of himself in front of his men. Cha responds with a jab of his own, pointing out that he's already sent most of the crew on a weekend off. Yet Goseong brought his entire platoon of lackeys. Then another guy in a coat chimes in and tells Cha that he really shouldn't have stirred up trouble by messing with the Kim family. And when it was not enough, he tipped off Goseong and his men recently. Our gangster throws another brutal jab, and this time, Goseong himself loses his cool, and he is going absolutely bonkers to what just Cha said. He furiously orders all his lackeys to charge at Cha, and the gang rushes at Cha like a pack of wild dogs, ready for a fight. But our beloved gangster isn't just any weakling. He deftly ducks, letting a punch zoom past over his face, and retaliates with a devastating blow that leaves his attacker reeling. Another lackey tries to swing at him, but ends up taking a brutal hit right under the chin, crashing to the ground in a pool of blood. Go-sung grits his teeth in frustration while Cha continues to drop lackeys as if they're mere flies. Suddenly, Cha takes a brutal jab with a stick from behind. He groans in pain but quickly recovers, throwing a punch in return that sends his assailant crashing down for the count. Even though Cha manages to take out a bunch of guys, the sheer number of lackeys is overwhelming. It's clear that despite his skill, he won't be able to take them all down like this. Our beloved gangster takes his stance, knowing he's up against copious amounts of people, and is furious that Go-seong brought so many guys when he knew Cha does not have most of the men in the club. He can't help but smirk when he thinks about our boy, and wonders if he has saved his little sister by now. With the speak of the devil, Jin arrives outside the club. The lackeys standing guard tell him to get lost, but Jin isn't about to take orders. He delivers a brutal kick to one of them, sending him crashing to the ground and leaving the other two speechless at Jin's audacity. He then dismounts from his bike, and the two remaining lackeys try to take a swing at him. But Jin effortlessly grabs one's hand and delivers a devastating smash to his face, leaving blood splattering everywhere. The remaining lackey tenses up at the sight and ends up taking a heavy kick to his gut. With both goons taken care of, he moves further into the club, only to find a brutal scene of dead bodies. As he advances, a group of arrogant thugs orders him to leave. But our boy remains unfazed and keeps walking toward them. One of the thugs steps up, yammering some nonsense, but my guy quickly silences him with a single blow, sending him crashing to the ground and leaving the others utterly terrified. Despite their fear, the thugs recklessly charge at him, and our boy begins to deliver blows, taking them down one after another. The scene switches back to Gangster Cha, who is now exhausted after knocking out a bunch of thugs. Go-sung is absolutely livid, unable to believe that Cha is holding his own for so long by himself. On the other hand, Go-seong's assistant feels a sense of relief that they only attacked Cha while he was alone. Otherwise, it would have been a massacre. More lackeys charge at our gangster, but he quickly takes out the one in front of him. Before he can fully move around, he receives a devastating punch to the face. Cha responds in kind, delivering a powerful punch back with equal force. At this point, Cha is barely hanging on. Even Go-sung reluctantly admits that he is a tough nut to crack and deserves praise for his efforts. However, he makes it clear that Cha looks like he's at the end of his rope and should just give up now. They'll make it worth his while. Cha spits out a mouthful of blood and asks why he should do that. Wiping the blood off his face, he decides he's going to finish what he started, no matter what. We can tell that the big cheese is not impressed by Cha's gutsy display, and the swarm of lackeys surrounding the place are visibly shaking to hear his bold statement. Suddenly, there's a commotion at the entrance, with the lackeys screaming their heads off. Go-sung, bewildered, asks what the hell is going on and why his men are screeching like dogs. They turn around, initially seeing nothing, but then they hear footsteps. Out steps Jin, and the entire crowd of lackeys is stunned to see a kid in their midst. Cha is equally shocked to see him, and quickly asks what the hell he is doing there. To which Jin casually responds that he's just there to return the motorcycle he borrowed. Well, Cha was literally not expecting to hear this kind of crap while they are surrounded by death itself. Meanwhile, Go-sung's assistant sneers once he realizes that Cha knows this kid, so he promptly orders his lackeys to take Jin down as well. The lackey proudly complies, and begins to walk toward our boy as if he is about to scold the toddler. Cha then tells them that it would be better if they just leave him alone. But the assistant insists they can't just let Jin go since he's seen everything. Cha snaps back once again, saying they should pray to God that Jin feels generous enough to let them go, not the other way around. The assistant has no clue what this stupid head is yammering about, but he soon gets a wake-up call when Jin takes down one of his guys with a single punch. Our boy then follows up with a kick that cracks another lackey's leg and a headbutt to another, sending him sprawling. One of the thugs tries to swing a bat at Jin from behind, but Jin quickly grabs his hand and delivers a brutal smash to his face, leaving him bloodied. The bat clatters to the ground. Go-sung is completely blown away by Jin's display, and Cha just smirks, saying it's their fault for not listening earlier. He adds that even though Cha himself is tough, he wouldn't stand a chance against this kid. The big cheese simply commands his lackeys to take Jin down, and they quickly charge at him. But as usual, Jin effortlessly takes them down, making them look like amateurs in the process. Growing impatient, the big cheese shouts at his lackeys to stop letting a little punk beat them. But just as he's about to make another command, he suddenly falls silent when he sees Cha charging at him. At this point, Go-sung is pretty sure things are about to get even messier for him. Shortly after, the big cheese and his lackeys are all on the ground, looking like they've kissed the dirt, while Cha slumps back, utterly exhausted. Jin strides over to him, and when Cha looks up, he sees the wreckage of the fight. People scattered around like discarded wrappers, with Jin standing triumphantly. Jin starts heading out, casually saying that Cha has now paid his dues. Cha is shocked and still trying to wrap his head around how this kid is so fixated on the same bullcrap after all this. He then asks if Jin saved his sister. Jin calmly replies that he did, and it's all thanks to Cha. The next scene shifts to a hospital room where one of Cha's lackeys suddenly jolts awake. As he looks around, he spots Cha on the other side of the room, all patched up, but clearly still in rough shape. The lackey is stunned to see his boss there, and Cha quickly tells him to stop calling him boss while they're in the hospital. Confused, the junior asks how his boss ended up here. Cha casually mentions he got roughed up and just took a cab to get treated. The lackey then inquires about Go-seong and the rest of the lackeys. Cha, with a nonchalant shrug, says he took care of them all. The junior simply can't believe it and calls this BS, prompting the senior to get a bit annoyed and asks why his junior thinks he'd lie. The lackey suggests it's probably because he is too embarrassed to admit he got beaten by Go-seong. Cha then asks if he happened to have met Jin yesterday. The junior perks up and confirms that he did indeed meet him. He further explains that he got ambushed by the enemy team while he was heading out of the club, and after getting brutally wounded, he found our boy and yelled at him. He charged at Jin out of anger, but after receiving the first hit, he fainted and doesn't remember anything else. The boss explains that Jin probably knocked him out to get him to the hospital. Cha then continues, saying that inside the club, he was overwhelmed by the sheer number of enemies. That's when Jin showed up, took them all out in seconds, and then told him he'd paid his dues before simply walking out. The lackey finds this absolutely admirable and thinks it's really badass, to say the least. The senior agrees, acknowledging that Jin is indeed quite impressive. The lackey then asks his boss if he has any clue who this kid really is. The senior points out that Jin claims to be just an average teenager, so he figures they'll have to take his word for it. In the next scene, we see a football heading straight toward Jin, and he catches it effortlessly. The referee immediately announces it as a handball, leaving everyone on the playground absolutely shocked. His friend, visibly annoyed, reminds him that he's not supposed to grab the ball because he's not a goalkeeper. Jin is confused about why he's getting an earful, apologizes anyway. Suddenly the bell rings, and Jin's friends call out to him, asking if he has time to hang out since today is the only day Youngchan doesn't have lessons after school, and they're planning to do some gaming together. Jin tells them to go ahead, and that he'll meet them at the location later, because he needs to walk his sister home first. His friends are a bit bewildered and ask if he's started to babysit his sister again. Jin explains that she's not feeling well lately. Blondie decides to save a spot for Jin, and meanwhile, Daeyeon is preparing to leave her class. She's thinking about making kimchi stew for Jin because he loved it the last time. However, she's unsure if he can handle spicy food, so she's considering making a milder soybean paste stew instead. Suddenly, she hears a buzz of excitement from the other girls in her class. They're all gathered by the window, swooning over Jin. Some find him hot, while others are hoping he'll become their boyfriend. The girls even turn to Daeyeon and ask if her brother is dating anyone. Daeyeon is caught off guard by their dripping enthusiasm about her brother, so she hesitates, and then reluctantly says that he mentioned he's not dating anyone. As the ladies dash back over the window, Daeyeon smiles faintly, clearly pleased that her brother is well known among the girls. Walking outside the school, she wonders why Jin doesn't have a girlfriend, and if he might not be interested in girls at all. Suddenly, she hears some voices nearby and discovers that it's Jin with his friends. Startled, she quickly tries to greet them as politely as possible. One of the more bashful lackeys blushes at her cuteness and just waves in response to her greeting. The boys decide to head off to the game room, hoping Jin will meet them there. Once they're gone, Daeyeon asks if Jin is hanging out with his friends. He confirms that he is, but adds that he'll stop at home first. When she asks if it's because of her, Jin explains that he just left something at home, but she still insists that she can walk home on her own since it's still bright outside. However, Jin claims that he really needs to pick up something he left at home. She then points out that he doesn't need to go out of his way for her, just like she told Yona when she offered to have security escort her. All she wants is to lead a normal life. Jin stays quiet but agrees to her request, saying he'll do as she says, though he suggests they still walk home together from time to time. Daeyeon pouts, saying he worries too much, but Jin explains he's not just worried, he actually enjoys their walks. In the end, she finally agrees to keep walking with him. As they're walking, Jin suddenly stops when he spots that same woman with black hair which we suspect to be Yona's sister. Anyway, she greets Jin, but he doesn't bother to respond to her greetings. Meanwhile, Daeyeon is just as clueless about the woman with the black hair. The woman then pretends to notice Daeyeon for the first time, puts on an exaggeratedly concerned look and says she must be the one who went through so much because of Yeona's abduction. Daeyeon is seriously confused by now and asks who she is. The woman introduces herself as Yeona's cousin and says she's here to thank Daeyeon for helping Yeona, and offers to treat her to dinner if she has some time. Jin flatly refuses, explaining that Yeona already thanked him personally, so there's no need for this stranger to go out of her way. The woman is bewildered by his bluntness but tries to continue the conversation, saying she also has a proposition that could benefit both of them. Once again, Jin firmly declines, saying he's not interested. He then just starts to walk away, leaving this arrogant woman absolutely fuming. But before he's completely out of sight, Daeon makes sure to bow her head and give her one last polite nod. Meanwhile, the lady is seething with rage, and her guard asks if he should bring him back forcefully, but the lady says no. It seems her ego's been bruised more than we thought, and she's practically boiling over with anger. Next up, we're in the gaming room where everyone's glued to their TV screens. While they're all deeply immersed in their game, Youngchan decides it's time to take a dump. As he's heading down the hall, he accidentally bumps into a cocky punk. This guy immediately starts threatening Youngchan, barking at him to watch where he's going. Youngchan, poor guy, is practically shaking and stumbles out an apology. But Mr. Cocky isn't done. He's about to slap Youngchan across the face. Just in the nick of time, Jae-hyung bursts onto the scene and saves his friend from getting slapped. Jae-hyung strides over cockily, telling the cocky punk to get over it, because there's no need to make a scene over a little shoulder bump. He quickly spits out the lollipop he was sucking and locks eyes with the punk, and tells him to not take them for a bunch of goddamn scaredy cats. The punk's nerves are clearly rattled by Jae-hyung's deadly glare, and my guy continues to stare him down and demands this crazy punk why the hell he is staring. Once the punk is thoroughly intimidated, he finally walks off with whatever pride he has left. Jae-hyung lets out a puff of air through his nostrils, looking pretty pleased with himself. On the other hand, Youngchan still appears to be in shock, watching his friend and reflecting on the turn of events. It's a bit of a shock to him, considering Jae-hyung used to be the one bullying him, and now he's the one coming to his rescue. Orangehead tells them they'd better hurry, or Hyokjin will start giving them grief for being late. So, they head toward the toilet, while Youngchan still can't believe his eyes that this dude saved him. When they finally return, Hyokjin asks why taking a dump took so long. Orangehead explains there was some idiot trying to mess with Youngchan. Hyokjin's interest peaks, and he quickly asks who it was. Orangehead says the guy was wearing a Gosok Tech uniform. Blondie then turns to Youngchan, checking if he's okay. The timid fella simply replies that he's fine, because nothing had happened since Jae-hyung interrupted just in time. Orangehead decides it's time to just dive into the game. But then, a bunch of rowdy people burst into the gaming room. It's the same guy Jae-hyung bumped into earlier, and he's brought his lackeys to get revenge for the humiliation. Hyokjin is completely absorbed in his game, and doesn't notice the people standing over his left shoulder. When he finally looks up, he sees a bunch of goons towering over him, and the leader of the gang quickly tells him to step outside. Both Hyokjin and Jae-hyung realize that shit is about to get real, and Youngchan is shaking, terrified just thinking about what's coming next. Once they head outside, Youngchan is trembling with fear, feeling utterly terrified because they've gotten into this mess because of him. The cocky guy from before starts bragging about how Orangehead was all talk and no action, claiming it'll be easy to take down him and his other friend. But our Orangehead doesn't back down. He mocks the cocky guy, pointing out how he was scared and walked off quietly earlier, only to come back with his lackeys. The cocky guy doesn't appreciate the jab and gets furious. He tries to land a punch on Orangehead, but Jae-hyung quickly ducks and delivers a brutal punch to the cocky guy's face, showing him who's boss. The cocky leader staggers backward, and Youngchan, on the other hand, is practically panicking, convinced it's all his fault they're caught up in this mess. That's when Jae-hyung speaks up, telling his terrified friend that he doesn't need to feel guilty about anything, because these bastards are the ones who should be sorry. Those words absolutely melt Youngchan's heart, because seeing his friend looking so badass while saying that is almost overwhelming. But then, Hyokjin chimes in, pointing out that it's the exact same line Jin used a while back, and even the way Jae-hyung said it had the same energy. He jokes that he basically copied Jin, and now he feels like he needs to bleach his eyes after seeing his copycat friend in action. Orangehead starts blushing, feeling totally embarrassed, and admits that Jin looked so cool when he said those words that they stuck in his head, and he couldn't help but repeat them. While the trio is caught up in their own back and forth, they momentarily forget they're actually facing off against a gang, and they are too distracted to pay much attention to the goons. But soon enough, the lackeys charge at them, because they are not here just to be simply ignored in the middle of the fight. The Orangehead stands his ground. As soon as one of the thugs reaches him, he delivers a powerful kick to the guy's gut, sending him stumbling backward. Another goon tries to swing at him, but Orangehead responds with a brutal whack, taking him down. Youngchan, who's not exactly a fighter, is more or less panicking on the sidelines, unsure of what to do. Hyokjin, however, is in full battle mode, taking down goons left and right. He turns to Youngchan and tells him to stay back and just watch from behind. Orangehead agrees, pointing out that while Youngchan might be a pro gamer, he is out of his element in this fight, so they have got things under control. Youngchan is completely blown away by this. He can't believe they're fighting because of him, and yet they're telling him to stay back. The goons are squirming and quivering on the ground after taking a serious beating. Our boys, on the other hand, are starting to struggle a bit, exhausted from the fight and outnumbered. Eventually, Jae-hyung takes a solid hit to the gut and feels the pain. He's sure that he is screwed because the cocky guy is about to land a punch right on his face, but before the punch can connect, Young-chan jumps onto the cocky guy, grabbing him tightly like he's found his brother from another mother. They both crash to the ground, and the cocky guy starts shoving Young-chan aside. But Young-chan holds on tightly despite the fear. That's when Orangehead takes his chance and swings his leg, delivering a devastating blow to the cocky guy's head. The impact leaves Young-chan a bit teary-eyed from the sheer brutality he's just witnessed, something he's never experienced before. Orangehead stands tall, looking like a boss after giving the cocky guy the final kick. He glances at the guy who's clearly down for the count. Hyukjin can't help but jab at Orangehead, noting how Young-chan had to step in to save the day. Orangehead quickly gets embarrassed and defensive, saying he was just about to take the guy down himself. They turn to Young-chan, who's on the verge of tears. Orangehead immediately asks if he's okay. The timid fella quickly reassures him that he's fine and apologizes for causing all this trouble. The scene shifts to our boy finally making it to the game room, only to find it empty. He tries calling his friends, but no one picks up. Just then, he hears someone calling his name. He turns around to see his friends, who eagerly tell him he missed all the action. The beta bullies start bragging about how they just whooped some Goseok Tech guys. They head inside, and as they climb the stairs, they point out to Jin that while he might not be familiar with the Goseok Tech guys, they're pretty tough, but not a match for them. As they head into the gaming room, they're shocked to find a bunch of people lying unconscious on the ground. The beta lackeys are blown away by the sight and quickly ask who took down all these Goseok Tech guys. Our boy casually points out that he came looking for everyone and was jumped by these guys when they saw his uniform. The three of them are absolutely stunned to realize that our boy took out all these men single-handedly. After their mindless fun at the arcade, the group heads out to grab some grub. The beta bullies have brought the same delicious food Young-chan usually eats, but Orangehead forgets to grab drinks and decides to go get some as soon as possible. Young-chan decides to go with him, but Orangehead opts to go himself. As they start eating, Hyukjin feels proud and laughs about how they took down the Goseok Tech goons. Orangehead agrees, saying the goons came in trying to act tough but ended up getting beaten like dogs. Meanwhile, our boy looks at the tuna mayo food with no clue how to proceed. He watches as Jae-hyung tears off the seal and pops the snack out of its wrapper. He mimics Jae-hyung and starts to take a bite. While eating, he asks his friends who started the fight. Jae-hyung explains that one of the goons was messing with Young-chan outside the game room, which triggered the whole scene. Our boy checks in on his timid friend, asking if he's alright. The friend says he's good, because Jae-hyung showed up to rescue him just in time. Orangehead then shares some advice, telling Young-chan that in situations like this, he should never back down. Young-chan looks a bit confused to hear this, so Orangehead explains that you shouldn't flinch in front of a bully. You need to make it clear you're ready for anything, or they'll just take advantage if they think you're scared. Hyukjin agrees, saying you've got to show you won't take any crap, or they'll just walk all over you. Young-chan asks what if they end up hitting him. Orangehead just shrugs and says they're going to try to hit him even if he's scared, but Young-chan worries they might hit him harder. Orangehead agrees, but he points out that if you don't stand up for yourself, you'll just be seen as a pushover, and that's worse than getting beaten up. Hyukjin also adds his 2 cents, saying he's seen this trick work before because no one wants to deal with trouble. Bullies usually pick on the quiet ones who never speak up. Young-chan stays quiet, probably realizing that he's always been picked on because he didn't stand up for himself. As they chat, our boy keeps munching on his delicious food. The scene then drifts to his past, where instead of fancy food, he was stuck with some mediocre curry and a piece of dry bread. At that time, he had no choice but to eat it. What made it worse was that there were always strong guys around him, bullying the weak and taking their food. One day, a cocky guy demanded our boy hand over his food, but Jin wasn't having any of it, so he fought back and left a gruesome mess behind. His memory makes him reflect on how the same pattern of the strong preying on the weak seems to repeat itself, both in his past and present situations. That's when Young-chan finally musters up his courage and says out loud that he doesn't like either of the beta bullies. The two bullies choke on their food, their breath caught in their throats at hearing this. Young-chan continues, saying he hates them because they bullied kids in class, including him. Orangehead looks curious and asks when they even bullied anyone. He points out that they only joked around sometimes, nothing more. The blondie also agrees, saying that they never physically hurt anyone in class or made anyone do their dirty work. Compared to some of the other guys, like Gisu Kim, they're practically saints. But Young-chan stands firm, saying that even though they might just be joking or playing rough, it's still a form of violence to others. The beta bullies are stunned, because they are not sure what to think of it. Youngchan further continues, explaining that it's the same kind of violence no matter how big or small. He resents them for being so cruel without a shred of guilt. Once he is done speaking, he points out that since beta bullies told him to stand up for himself, he spilled everything he had in his mind to try it out. The beta bullies are completely thrown off by Youngchan's words. The blonde one is at a loss and says no one's ever told him anything like that before. He didn't realize people could see their actions that way and thought they were just joking around. The other bully also agrees, saying they figured it was okay since they weren't as bad as some of the others. Youngchan, still feeling nervous, explains that he was surprised by how nice the beta bullies seemed when he hung out with them. He guessed they didn't realize that what they were doing was a form of bullying. Feeling guilty, Orange Head quickly apologizes. The blonde also says sorry, admitting they're not sure how to fix things but at least want to offer an apology. On the other hand, our boy is still messing with his food. When he takes off the shell of his rice ball, it drops to the ground, and he's totally bummed out to see his meal ruined. His friends don't really know how to react, and they end up yelling at him when he tries to eat the rice ball after picking it up. In the bustling heart of the city, we find ourselves back at SW Corporation. There, we see that same woman who claimed to be Yona's cousin is sitting at her desk. Suddenly, Yona storms into the room, clearly fuming, and she yells this woman's name, Jie. The sassy lady looks up and smiles at Yona, but before she can say much, Yona cuts her off with a sharp tone, demanding to know if she met Jin recently. Jie tries to play it cool and reminds Yona that it was actually Yona who was tracking Jin's background because she was suspicious of him. Yona frustratingly admits that she did investigate Jin, but had promised him she wouldn't pursue it further. Now she is also telling Jie to stop nagging our boy as well. Jie raises an eyebrow and reminds her that she shouldn't forget the kind of world they live in, especially given the recent kidnapping event. So, she makes it clear that they are not taking any chances, and our boy's background is a major concern. Yona insists that Jin wasn't involved in any of the recent trouble, but Jie quickly interrupts, saying that just because Jin helped with a rescue doesn't make him trustworthy. Jie's manager also chimes in, pointing out that Jin's identity is a significant issue for the school. They emphasize that a school affiliated with SW Corporation shouldn't have accepted a student with fake records, and they make it clear that they won't overlook this matter. Yona frustratingly grits her teeth, while Jie just smiles with a hint of satisfaction. She explains that they might receive some good news soon. Curious, Yona asks what kind of news she is talking about. Jie's manager explains that Jin's records were restricted, so they had to consult higher-ups in their network to obtain more information. Jie looks at Yona with a challenging smile, asking if she's not curious about Jin's true identity. Yona firmly states that she doesn't care, emphasizing that Jin saved her, which is more than enough for her. Just then, the telephone rings, grabbing everyone's attention. Jie's smirk widens as she says it's time for them to hear the news together. She answers the call, and the caller announces that they have news to deliver. As Yona waits anxiously, Jie expresses hope that the caller will reveal information about Jin's identity. The caller responds that the higher-ups have decided that SW Corporation should refrain from any further inquiries into Jin's background. The announcement leaves Jie visibly pale, and the guards stunned as well. Her frustration boils over, and she starts yelling at the caller, demanding to know how they can simply let the matter slide. The caller makes it clear that, given the enduring relationship between SW Corporation and the government, they have decided to overlook the matter. The caller explains that Jin is estranged from his family due to an unfortunate plane crash and is essentially a young man who has found his way back home. They emphasize that it would be best to let him live his life without further scrutiny. The next day at school, Yona walks in with her escort, catching everyone's attention, including our boys who are curious to see them back after such a long time. Yona suddenly starts looking at them with a direct gaze, which makes Youngchan feel uneasy. She approaches him and simply asks if Jin isn't in school today. Youngchan, looking around for Jin, explains that he was just here, but Jaehyung explains that he just got called to the office a few minutes ago. As Yona and her escort, Seokju, settle into their seats, her escort reveals that the chairman is at the school right now. Yona is surprised to hear that her grandfather is at the school, and wonders why he didn't inform her of his visit, and if Jin might have gone to meet him in the office. In the office, we finally meet the old man we've been hearing so much about. He's thrilled to finally meet our boy in person, especially since our boy had previously turned down a meeting, so he came by himself to thank him for saving Yona. Our boy responds that there's no need for thanks. He was just trying to rescue his sister, and Yona happened to be there too. The old man acknowledges that he knows, but he still wanted to express his gratitude for saving his granddaughter and apologize for involving his sister. Our boy clears things up again, letting the old man know that he doesn't need to worry about that since Yona has already apologized. The old man stays silent after hearing this, and our boy starts to head into the classroom. That's when Grandpa finally asks if he will become Yona's bodyguard. Not surprisingly, he flatly refuses and makes it clear that this isn't something an average teenager like him can handle. The old man reminds our boy that an average teenager couldn't really handle a unit of kidnappers made up of former Special Forces soldiers either. Jin then points out that Yona already has an internal security team guarding her 24/7. The old man agrees but says that a security team can't be with her at school. And besides, she wouldn't be able to live normally with a team trailing her all the time. He explains that Seokju was in charge of her security, but the recent incident made him realize he isn't the right person to protect her, so he's thinking of giving the job to our boy. Jin starts to walk away again, saying he can't help. The old man goes quiet for a moment, and then says he wasn't just here to thank him for saving Yona. He also wanted to thank him for what he did 3 years ago. As soon as our boy hears this, he freezes and quickly turns back toward the old man. The old man keeps going with his thanks, saying he's wanted to express his gratitude for a long time, because without our boy's efforts, he wouldn't have had the chance to see his son before he passed away. It's clear that Jin remembers what the old man is talking about, but he stays nonchalant, saying it was just another job. The old man insists it was a dangerous job that no one else would take on. Thanks to our boy's success in the mission, he was able to see his son again, and his son spoke about Jin often. The old man reveals that his son was worried and asked him to find out why our boy had become a mercenary. So, the old man tried to track him down but couldn't find any leads. Now, as fate would have it, they're face to face, and he adds that Yona is his daughter. Jin's mind quickly flashes back to the past, recalling the man mentioning that he had a daughter around his age. Still, Jin makes it clear that he can't be Yona's bodyguard. However, he adds that he won't turn a blind eye if something happens to her. The old man is a bit taken aback but then smiles and says that would be more than enough. He then adds that there's one more thing he'd like to request. He points out that he would like to hear Jin's thoughts on the security team at SW. Jin asks what he means, and the old man explains that SW's security team is part of a long-standing and proud tradition, maybe too proud for their own good. They believe that Yona's recent kidnapping would have been contained even without Jin's help. However, as SW continues to expand, the threats are growing, and their security division is lacking in innovation. The old man wants Jin's honest assessment of their skills, and it will be a paid assignment, of course. Jin lets out a sigh, feeling like all of this is just a drag. He then finally heads back into his classroom. As soon as he enters, Yona greets him, but he clearly ignores her and walks to his seat as the teacher starts the class for the day. Jin sits quietly in his chair, thinking about the old man's words. He realizes that Yona's father must have died since the old man mentioned he'd seen his son before he passed away. The scene then cuts back to the past. We see Jin as a mercenary, with all the site workers gathered around eating. Jin is munching on some kind of food bar when a voice calls out to him, asking how a kid like him ended up working as a mercenary. It's clear this man is Yona's father, and after he sees our boy's face, he comments that he didn't realize Jin was so young. Jin quickly covers his face and starts to walk away, but the man offers him his platter full of delicious and appetizing food. He tells Jin to throw away his trash and eat this instead, saying that what he eats really matters at his age. Meanwhile, the other mercenaries chat about how their new client seems really wealthy and explain how they're building roads, a school, and a clinic in the town they're all stationed in. As they chat, Jin listens quietly. While he's on guard duty, the man walks up to him again, offering him a chocolate bar. Jin just looks away. Later that night, the man offers him food once more, but Jin turns away again. On a particularly rainy day, the man brings an umbrella and coat, but Jin refuses them as well. One day, as Jin is packing up his stuff to leave, the same man approaches him again. He says he'll miss having Jin around and invites him to stop by if he can since they'll be there for at least another month. The man then tosses a bag to Jin, explaining that he's packed some snacks and basic medical supplies inside. Finally, Jin speaks up and asks why he's giving him all this. The question catches the man off guard, and he's surprised to hear Jin speak Korean. He adds that he tried speaking in Jin's native language and in English before, but didn't get a response. The man explains that he's giving these things because he has a daughter around Jin's age, and he reminds him of her, so he can't help but worry. Later, we found ourselves in a rundown place where conflict is ongoing. We then see Jin with his fellow mercenary. His fellow informs him that the town where Jin was stationed as a guard has been taken over by a resistance group. He explains that they were waiting for the foreigners to finish their construction so they could take over the buildings, and most of the people at the site had been killed. Jin is jolted out of his flashback by the sudden ringing of the bell, and he notices Yona calling out to him, asking if he's free right now. A while later, they're in the lounging area, where Seokju is bowing his head in respect and offering a late apology in person. Jin tells him there's no need for that, as he understands the reason behind his actions. Yona then says she's pretty sure Jin will deny it, and explains that Grandpa asked her to invite him on his behalf. Jin agrees without hesitation, leaving Yeona quite puzzled to see that he actually agrees without protest for the first time. The scene then shifts to Jie, who is gritting her teeth in frustration. She's fuming mad that the higher-ups aren't releasing Jin's true identity. Just then, her manager enters and mentions that the same student has arrived, which shocks Jie a little. In the SW Corporation's men's locker room, Jin is getting suited up in the company's dress code. Seokju asks how Jin ended up landing a job with SW Corporation. The scene transitions to the past, where Jin is reviewing the records of all the security personnel working for SW Corporation. The old man had told him to spend a few days with the team and share his thoughts since arrangements had been made to accommodate him. It should be fairly easy for Jin to get a sense of the program. Back in the present, Jin tells Seokju that he simply wanted to experience what being in the security team is like, so ended up here with a job. Seokju wonders if that means Jin wants to be a bodyguard. Jin then asks if Seokju isn't joining the training. In response, Seokju explains that today's session is for Team 2, and he is part of Team 3. He adds that Team 3 escorts Yeona exclusively, while Team 2 escorts Ms. Jie and her parents. The scene transitions to a training hall where all the personnel are sitting on the ground. One of the instructors introduces Jin to everyone, explaining that Jin will be joining them for the next few days. He's in the same class as Seokju, and the chairman has allowed him to participate in their program to learn about their field. One of the men raises his hand and asks if Jin is the one who handled the kidnapping situation with Seokju. The senior confirms that he is indeed the same person. Jin introduces himself and thanks everyone for letting him participate. As the students begin their training, we see Yeona standing above, observing our boy. Seokju reveals to her that our boy is here because he wanted to experience what it's like to be a bodyguard. Or at least that is what Jin told him. Meanwhile, the guards are running down the halls, engaged in their training. As Yeona watches our boy, she also notices someone else in the hall, and it's Jie along with her guard. Yeona curiously wonders what she is doing there. Meanwhile, Jin is running across the hall with the other soldiers. The senior leading the pack takes a quick look back and sees that Jin is keeping up well, so he decides to pick up the pace, running even more intensely. After several rounds, all the soldiers are completely out of breath, and the senior looks utterly exhausted, as if he might faint any moment. Jin, however, looks as if nothing has happened, taking just a simple, casual breath. The senior reveals to us that they've run enough to make anyone faint, but Jin kept up the whole time and even looks like he could handle 20 more laps. They move on to other intense exercises, and Jin excels at those as well. From the sidelines, Yeona is absolutely blown away by how Jin outperforms everyone, leaving them struggling to keep up. Meanwhile, Jie just sneers, saying it's just basic training, and still Team 2 is falling way behind this kid. As our boy stands there, the senior is wondering where in the hell they found this kid. He's questioning if he's been trained somewhere before because he's just too good. Then the senior notices Jie standing nearby, and his face goes pale as soon as he makes eye contact with her bodyguard. He realizes he's going to catch flack from Jie and her bodyguard later for falling behind compared to a high schooler. Suddenly, one of the juniors raises his hand and points out that he's heard this student played a critical role in Miss Yeona's rescue, so he wants to test the kid's skills himself. The senior gets angry and asks if he really wants to spar with a high school kid, yelling at his junior for being out of his mind. But the senior finds himself completely blown away when the kid himself volunteers to fight and says he doesn't really mind. The senior, completely at a loss for words, scratches his head in frustration and reluctantly agrees. He tells his juniors to get the protective gear for our boy. Before long, our boy is decked out in his gear, and the other guy facing him gets suited up too. Yeona wonders if this will be okay, and Seokju points out that it's hard to say, given how tough the other guys are. Even Jai thinks it would be pretty hilarious if this high school kid actually won. She mentions she's heard the kid has extraordinary fighting skills, but her bodyguard assures her that he's still no match for his men, because these guys have been highly trained in all sorts of combat, long before they started working at SW. The senior tells both of them to just take it easy, especially telling his junior to go a bit easy on the kid, and the junior agrees. The senior then tells them to get ready, so the junior takes his stance and reminds our boy that he's not against those chumps he has beaten before, so he better be careful. Our boy doesn't even flinch at the jab and simply takes his own stance. As soon as the senior signals the start of the fight, the junior lunges at our boy with an incredible burst of speed and swings a punch right at his face. But our boy quickly steps back. The junior swings again with full force, but Jin dodges effortlessly once more. Yeona, growing anxious, points out that the soldier wasn't supposed to go that hard during a sparring match. But the soldier, however, keeps coming at Jin, swinging his fists left and right. Jin continues to dodge every attack effortlessly. Then, Jin quickly kicks the junior's leg, causing him to stagger. Seizing the moment, our boy balls up his fist and throws a brutal punch. But the soldier quickly raises his hands to block, avoiding a direct hit. The fatty mocks our boy for his futile attack and gets ready to hit him with a punch of his own. But Jin quickly deflects the incoming fist and counters with a brutal blow right to the bastard's face. That display of power leaves Yona breathless, and even her guard finds it pretty impressive that Jin struck precisely where the fatty's face was exposed. As the fatty writhes in pain, Jin grabs him by the head and delivers a vicious knee smash to his face, leaving him bloody and beginning to collapse to the ground. Jie is absolutely blown away by what just happened, while Jin stands there as the clear winner, with his opponent slumped unconscious on the ground. He removes the protective gear from his head, and both the senior and the other soldiers are stunned by the turn of events. Seokju notes that they were clearly instructed to take it easy, but this was just too intense. Jie speaks up again, questioning if this kid is really the 19-year-old they claimed he was. Meanwhile, her bodyguard is fuming at the top of his head, as Team 2 is part of his crew, and he is not at all happy to see one of his soldiers going down like flies after being beaten by a teenager. The other soldiers drag their incapacitated buddy off the ground, while Jin remains the center of attention. By now, the senior has no doubt about Jin's role in saving Yeona from the kidnappers. Meanwhile, Jie's bodyguard is giving his soldiers death glares. They're all panicking, especially the senior, who's sweating bullets because he's sure he's in big trouble. Then, another soldier, Beomseok Choi, raises his hand and volunteers to spar with Jin too. The senior reminds him that they've already lost to a kid once, and doesn't want to look foolish by losing again. But Beomseok, brimming with confidence, says he's really itching to fight Jin after seeing his impressive skills. The senior points out that they can't all just rush at Jin, but Jin says he's totally fine and not exhausted at all. He even adds that he hasn't moved around enough to be tired. This freaks everyone out a bit because after taking down one of their top soldiers, he's practically saying he hasn't even broken a sweat. Seokju lets out a sigh, clearly not surprised by our boy's antics. Beomseok finally steps into the ring, face to face with Jin. While stretching his muscles, he casually asks our boy where he learned to fight like that. Jin then asks if Beomseok isn't going to wear his headgear, to which the soldier confidently replies that he doesn't need it. He tells Jin to go ahead and use one if he wants to. But Jin was only asking for the guy's sake. He doesn't care about headgear either, so he just tosses it aside, surprising Beomseok and even Yeona. That's when Beomseok starts getting cocky, calling Jin a punk and saying he likes his spirit. Jie then curiously asks her bodyguard what he thinks will happen this time. In response, he admits they made the mistake of underestimating Jin earlier, but he's confident they can take him down now. He takes major pride in his men, who train tirelessly every single day. Not to mention, our boy is about to face the ace of the team this time. Jie cracks a smile, eagerly anticipating how Beomseok will handle Jin. Meanwhile, Yona's bodyguard is starting to think Jin might actually lose this round. In a weapon-free fight like this, it all boils down to physical strength, and Beomseok Choi is a jacked-up dude. There's no telling what kind of rigorous training Jin has had, but nothing can make up for the raw strength Beomseok is rocking. As the fight begins, Beomseok, full of bravado, takes his stance and swings at Jin, but our boy casually sidesteps the punch with ease. Jin tries to land a punch on Beomseok, but this dude isn't here to mess around. He dodges Jin's attack quickly and counters with a punch of his own. Jin also tilts to the side to save him and throws another punch, but Beomseok grabs Jin's fist and smirks. He acknowledges that Jin's punch is stronger than he expected based on his appearance. But Jin isn't interested in mid-fight chit-chat. He throws another punch, but Beomseok blocks it effortlessly. He gives Jin props for his great timing, but smirks and scoffs that no one can break his guard with pesky blows like that. But that's where he's dead wrong. Jin quickly swings his leg and lands a solid kick to Beomseok's thigh. The cocky guy is now totally stunned, and the senior's jaw practically hits the floor to see our boy making a hardcore comeback. Then Jin follows up with another brutal kick to Beomseok's leg. By now, Beomseok is absolutely fuming and throws a punch in a fit of frustration, but Jin calmly takes his stance and lands a nasty whack to Beomseok's chin, followed by a few more blows that leave the cocky guy clenching his teeth in frustration. Beomseok tries to swing at Jin again, but our boy deflects it with some slick ninja-like moves. Then, he delivers a solid slap to Beomseok's throat, making him cough up and spit. With a heavy thud, the once muscular guy drops to his knees. The first shocked face we see is Yeona's, quickly followed by Jie and her bodyguard. Meanwhile, Jin just stands there while the muscular guy coughs violently on the ground. Yeona's bodyguard is blown away by how strategically Jin broke Beomseok's upper guard. By striking his knee and then immediately going for the neck, he effectively narrowed the gap in their physical strength. Further attacks on vital points would have completely neutralized Beomseok's advantages. Jin then asks if anyone else is itching for a throwdown, but it's clear no one's eager to step forward. That's when the senior chimes in, telling Jin he shouldn't go for the neck or knees when sparring. Jin, looking genuinely puzzled, asks if there are rules to sparring and apologizes if he broke any since he wasn't aware. The senior quickly clarifies that there aren't really any specific rules, but it's just something he felt like mentioning. Well, deep down, the senior feels like he is just trying to save his sorry face after getting his butt handed over by a high schooler. After witnessing the entire battle, GA is absolutely certain that it wasn't just a stroke of luck that Jin was able to rescue Yona, and she wants her bodyguard's take on the matter. The man, clearly pissed off after seeing his soldiers drop like flies, reluctantly admits that from basic training to serious combat, Jin excels in every aspect. GA smiles thoroughly at this, and then quickly tells everyone to move on to the next course. Everyone is startled, especially Yeona, who has no clue what GA even means by that. GA then walks over to Jin and reminds him that since he's here to experience real security duties, it's finally time to see what it's like to be a real bodyguard. Jin listens intently as she explains that since he's paired with Team 2, he'll be escorting her, and she's looking forward to his service. Yona, however, can tell from a mile away that this woman is cooking up something shady. The next scene takes us into one of the offices inside SW Corp, where we meet the grandpa, who's with a suited guy. This suited guy is amazed that Jin is in the same class as Yona. He explains that he learned about Jin's background during their research, but it's still a shock to see that codename Jin is actually this young kid. The suited guy adds that Jin's name only came to light a few years ago, which means he was even younger when he first gained recognition. He just can't wrap his head around how this kid could be the same ruthless individual he's heard about. The scene then shifts back to the locker room, where Jin is finally suited up in a real bodyguard outfit, and he looks seriously badass. Evening has arrived, and we find Diane and her grandpa together. The old man asks her if Jin is still out with friends. In response, she explains that Jin had to take care of something and said he'd be a little late. The grandpa is concerned, saying Jin shouldn't stay out too late. He's sure Jin will be fine, but if he runs into any trouble with hooligans late at night, it could be a problem. The next scene shows the two defeated soldiers who were getting pretty cocky before fighting Jin. They're now getting an earful from their superior, and everyone is feeling ashamed after getting their butts kicked by Jin. The senior is so livid his veins are practically bulging, and he makes it crystal clear that they're about to face training like they've never seen before. The soldiers' faces fall when they hear this, and the senior lets out a sigh of relief that they didn't get chewed out by their boss today. Meanwhile, Yona is absolutely blown away when she sees Jin stepping out in his bodyguard uniform, looking like he's about to hit the town for a date. Even Jie is really pleased to see him, and those defeated soldiers can't help but feel a bit jealous of our boy. As we head outside the building, Jin and two other guards are escorting Jie. There are several other guards as well, making sure she gets into her luxurious Bentley without any issues. Once she's inside, the guards follow, while Jin stands outside until the senior bodyguard tells him to just get in the car. With that command, Jin takes a seat in the back alongside Yona. Once inside, he notices how two guards are always at Jie's side. Out of the blue, Jie asks our boy if he's ever thought about singing or acting as a career. She explains that one of the SW subsidiaries she runs is an entertainment agency, which is where they're headed right now. Jin, however, simply states that he's not interested. She then asks him why he's interested in becoming a bodyguard. As soon as our guy hears this, he realizes these folks probably don't know the real reason behind his involvement, so he just goes with the flow and says he wanted to experience life as a bodyguard. She then gives him props, saying he's pretty good at this job. Judging by how well he did in training today and how easily he beat the guards in Team 2, she's impressed. But when his bodyguard hears about his Team 2's defeat, he's absolutely livid, turning red with anger. He's embarrassed to get reminded that his team got trounced by a high schooler. On the other hand, Jin points out that he only won because Team 2 let their guard down. They had to hold back because he's just an inexperienced kid, so he had a greater advantage from the start. If they had taken him seriously as a real opponent, he's pretty sure he would have lost both duels. The woman acknowledges the situation, but deep down, she thought Jin would be more boastful about beating working guards. Turns out he's not like that at all. Meanwhile, the bodyguard is blown away by how our boy has thought through everything so well. A while later, they finally reach their destination. In that other SW Corporation building, we see she's sitting in her office, while our boy and the senior bodyguard are standing outside. The senior is amazed that after standing there for an hour, our boy hasn't even flinched. So out of curiosity, he asks where he received such intense training. Our boy simply looks at him and stays silent. The senior asks again where he picked up those moves from the sparring session, because this isn't something you can just pull off by luck. In response, Jin just says he learned on the streets where he grew up. This vague answer really ruffles the senior bodyguard's feathers, who wasn't expecting such a brush-off. Well, his answer wasn't too far from the truth. The scene then transitions to his past, showing how he really did learn these skills on the streets. We see him running alongside his buddy, while a hail of bullets rains down from behind. He's climbing ropes to reach the treetops in harsh weather and facing off against highly trained soldiers and killers. But he never flinches. Once they head out again, their car zooms down the highway. Jie asks if he's feeling alright since it's been a long day. He says he's fine, and she finds it odd because it's his first day on the job for this line of work. But he confirms once again that this is indeed his first time. Meanwhile, the senior bodyguard reflects on how this is typical of our boy. He hasn't asked a single question since they started the route, and hasn't shown any signs of being affected, even when they deliberately skipped dinner to test him. It's as if he's fully aware that these things can happen in security work. He never budged from his position until he was instructed to do so. Suddenly, Jin notices something serious up ahead. There's a truck coming, and the driver inside looks either drunk or sleepy. It's hard to tell. What is clear is that the truck veers out of its lane and heads straight for the car Jin and Jie are in. The truck skids across the road and crashes into their car. Once the car comes to a stop, the bodyguards from the other car rushes over. The airbags have deployed, and the senior bodyguard quickly checks the back seat, asking if Jie is all right, and what he sees there blows his mind. Jin has managed to hold Jie close, saving her just in time to avoid the worst of the crash. The bodyguard is amazed that Jin could react so quickly and protect her in that split second before impact. But then Jie yanks herself away from Jin and creates some distance. The other bodyguard rushes to her, asking if she's okay. The other guards quickly gather around to discuss what just happened. One of them reports that the truck driver was definitely drunk. The junior guard adds that the driver appears unconscious, and they're currently pulling him out of the vehicle. The senior guard tells everyone to call an ambulance, secure the driver, and make sure to get to the bottom of this incident. Meanwhile, inside the car, Jie looks at Jin, who's sitting quietly. She's startled and asks if he's okay. Jin simply nods in affirmation. But Jie points out that he might have been hurt and suggests he should come with them to the hospital to get checked out. Instead of responding to this, Jin reminds her that she should always wear her seatbelt, even when sitting in the back seat. Seems like this is not what she was expecting to hear at such a critical moment, so she has no clue how to respond to this brutal truth bomb. Back at home, Daeon is busy preparing some delicious food, and Jin also walks into the living room and asks if she's making lunch. She responds that she's cooking for Grandpa and will save some for him to have later too. Jin reminds her that Grandpa is already at work. Daeon explains she plans to take it to his workplace, just like she used to visit him there often, but hasn't ever since our boy came back home. Jin decides to tag along with her and seals the deal with a warm smile. Later, in the bustling city, we find Grandpa happily chatting with his fellow officer. The officer is teasing him, asking if he won the lottery or something, since he looks so cheerful since returning from vacation. Grandpa looks puzzled and asks what he means. The officer points out that he just looks unusually happy lately. Grandpa is confused by the teasing, and his friend further reveals that apartment 703 just gave them some snacks to share. He's told to drop by to grab him after his shift. Grandpa replies that he'll come by after he finishes sorting out the recycling. As the old man starts shoving down the trash into the bins, he reflects that he might have let himself get too excited about Jin's return, to the point where others have started to notice his happiness. Suddenly, Grandpa hears some commotion. He sees a thug slam on the brakes in the middle of the road and get out of his car. Another person behind him tells him to move his car instead of blocking the road. But this cocky guy just gets out of his sports car, holding 2 disposable glasses. With a smug attitude, he uses every name in the book to tell the other guy to shut up, saying he'll be back in a minute after tossing these glasses. The man in the car is visibly scared by the thug's attitude. The thug strides over to Grandpa and drops the 2 disposable glasses into the dustbin, but he's so careless that they just fall to the ground instead of making it into the bin, leaving Grandpa with extra work. The old promptly picks up the scattered trash. Meanwhile, the thug's girlfriend, who's still in the car, tells her boyfriend to throw this bag of trash as well. Reluctantly, he grabs the trash bag and throws it from a distance, not bothering to walk over to the bin. As expected, Grandpa ends up picking up the mess left behind by the inconsiderate duo. The thug zooms out of the place in his car, and just as Grandpa is busy putting the garbage to its rightful place, he hears a familiar voice and turns to find his children arriving to visit him. Although Grandpa is thrilled to see his children, he still asks what they're doing there. They reveal they brought lunch for him, but he insists they shouldn't have gone to the trouble. He can just buy something nearby. Daeon looks around and notices Grandpa is sorting out the recycling. He agrees, saying it's better to take care of it before it piles up and gets out of hand. The charming girl offers to help with the job, but Grandpa quickly tells her she doesn't need to get her clothes dirty. Daeon, however, has already made up her mind and brushes off his concern, saying she'll just wash them later. So they start sorting out the trash, with our hero quietly standing behind, beaming with happiness to be with the family. After a while, we see the girls blushing while looking in a certain direction. It wouldn't be surprising if they're admiring our boy's handsome face. In the background, we catch sight of Mr. Cha and his lackey, who have finally been discharged from the hospital and have been walking out from his apartment. Suddenly, Mr. Cha perks up when his eyes wanders at front and spots our boy sorting out some trash and he has no clue what the hell he is doing there. Cha's lackey recognizes the old man and realizes he's the grandpa they saw when they went to get the kid. Hearing this, Cha quickly pieces it together and figures out that the girl must be our boy's sister. Seeing our boy smiling so warmly, Cha finds it fascinating that he knows how to smile after all, and he can finally see that he really does look like an average teenager. The lackey suggests they go over and say hello, but Cha decides against it, saying guys like them usually just end up ruining moments like that. Instead, he decides they should grab a bite to eat. We then see the sweet family having their lunch in the park. The three of them are enjoying themselves, eating and chatting away. Once they're done, Daeun waves goodbye, and they decide to head out. Once the evening strikes, the old grandpa is also done with his duty, and walks to his home while smiling pleasantly. Then, he notices that same Corvette he had seen in the noon when that thug came to throw that trash. The old man approaches the thug and reminds him that parking there isn't allowed because it blocks the entry and creates a hazard for children, so he suggests parking in the lot instead. The thug sneers and asks why he should listen to an old guy like him, making it clear he'll park his damn car wherever he wants. The old man tries to reason with him, but the blonde woman beside the thug threatens him, saying he's just a guard and wonders if he's trying to get fired. The old man keeps his smile and calmly explains that he knows he's paid by the residents, which is why he's asking them to park elsewhere to avoid causing trouble for others. The thug scoffs and says he won't park in the tiny parking lot because if another car scratches his, who's going to reimburse him for the damages? Grandpa is left without an answer, and the blonde woman sneers, doubting that Grandpa could cover the cost of the car. That's when Mr. Cha's lackey grabs the thug by the neck from behind. With a terrifying tone, he asks if this thug has no manners when speaking to his elders. The stupid head groans in pain and demands to know who's behind him. Cha's lackey leans in with a face that could scare ghosts and simply asks why he wants to know. The thug is absolutely terrified by the look Cha's lackey is giving him. The lackey yanks the thug away and tells him to shut up and move his car. He makes it clear that if he ever catches him giving this gentleman trouble again, he's going to make sure both of them get a serious beatdown. The disgusting couple quickly hops into their car and speeds away. Cha's lackey then smiles at the old man and asks if he's all right. Grandpa, unsure how to respond, simply says, "Thank you." The man then reminds Grandpa that Jin is his friend, and that he saw Jin working with the old man earlier today. Grandpa's mind perks up and remembers that this man is the same guy who came to their home one day to meet Jin. The scene cuts to Mr. Cha's turf, where the lackey meets up with his boss. Cha's in good spirits despite his fractured hand, glad he can still enjoy a drink with his other hand. The lackey mentions that if he hadn't stepped in, Grandpa would have had even more trouble from that little punk. Cha chuckles and gives his friend a nod for his solid work, noting how disrespectful punks can be these days. Suddenly Jin barges in abruptly and he looks quite terrifying at first glance. Cha immediately starts sweating to see our guy this serious, because Jin is the last person he would want to mess with. He asks Jin why he's giving them this insane look. By the way, we've been referring to this man as Cha's lackey for a while now. Since we don't know his name yet, let's give him one and call him Muscle Man. Jin pulls out his phone and shows a selfie of Muscle Man with Grandpa. Grandpa also had told our boy that one of his friends lives in the apartment where he works. Muscle Man starts blushing, feeling pretty pleased as well as embarrassed with himself. Meanwhile, Jin looks absolutely furious and asks Muscle Man if this is some kind of threat. Cha and his lackey are terrified that Jin is taking this the wrong way, and they definitely don't want to get on the bad side of our MC. As our boy's anger boils over, Muscleman starts to stagger and quickly tries to explain that it's just a gesture of goodwill, begging Jin to listen before taking any action. The scene then shifts to SW Corporation, where GA is asking her guard how the kid is doing. The guard remains silent for a moment, but then points out that the kid should be finishing up his training session with Team 3. GA then asks if Jin was taken to the hospital to get checked out and what the doctor said. The bodyguard reports that Jin had a few bruises but nothing serious to worry about. GA reflects on how Jin saved her just in time, and we can tell that she has a soft spot in her heart for him. She tells her bodyguard to check in on Jin just in case, as you never know what symptoms might develop after a car accident. She's concerned that if the media finds out the crash was staged and Jin gets hurt, it could create a real problem. Well, I already had a hunch from the start that the accident was staged because they just wanted to assess Jin's caliber. We then see Jin again, donning his school uniform back. Seokju asks him what's going on, noting that Jin seemed to be holding back compared to his last session. Jin points out that he does not want to get on the bad side of everyone. He then asks Seokju why he's still hanging out with the security team, since he initially thought Seokju had already finished his security training and moved on. Seokju sighs and explains that, contrary to what Jin might have heard, he was never an official guard. He only started because of his family and because he grew up with Yeona. Since he was good at being a bodyguard, he stuck with it. He admits that after seeing how Jin rescued Yona from kidnappers, he realized he's not as skilled as he thought he was and felt he needed to improve. Seokju mentions that he got all his training from SW but is curious about where Jin learned his moves, because he seems like a trained professional. Jin simply responds that he learned it on the streets where he used to live. Seokju senses that Jin isn't telling the full truth, but decides not to press him further. After they finish preparing in the men's locker room and head out, they find Yona standing outside, eavesdropping. Jin doesn't bother to engage with her and continues walking, but Yona quickly speaks up, asking if he's not planning to try more field work today. Jin looks confused, and Yona blushes as she explains that she thinks it would be a good opportunity to hang out, and it won't take too long. Jin remains silent, and both her guard and Seokju stay quiet as well after hearing her odd wish. Later, a bunch of guards are stationed outside while Yona and Jin stop by a stall to grab some food. Yona excitedly explains that she missed cup noodles and triangle kimbaps so much while she was in the US. As Jin looks at his triangle kimbaps, he has a flashback to an unpleasant memory where his food fell out of the wrapper and hit the ground. Seokju looks a bit bewildered by the rundown spot they've chosen for eating. Yona notices and asks Jin if he's not going to eat anything. Our boy then replies that he doesn't think he should eat with her since he's supposed to be guarding her. Yona is startled by this, and Seokju quickly explains that Team 3 is responsible for escorting Yona right now, and their job is to blend in as her companions while guarding her from close by. Yona charmingly agrees and tells everyone to just dig into the food. Meanwhile, Seokju reflects on how Yona picked the convenience store near his home on purpose because she knew he would decline if she took him somewhere nicer. Yona then brings up the accident that happened while Jin was escorting Jaye and asks if he's okay. Jin replies that he's fine, all while staring at his triangle kimbaps inside the packaging. Yona then asks if Jie gave him a hard time, noting that Jie is known for being super demanding and harsh. In response, Jin simply says everything went smoothly. Yona finds this hard to believe, as it doesn't sound like Jie at all. She comments that Jie only smiles when she's insulting others. As they chat, Jin looks at Yona's pleasant personality and finds himself drifting back into his memories. He remembers her father, utterly exhausted and injured, with Jin himself panting heavily, gun in hand, scanning for enemies. Her father tells him to leave him behind, saying that at least one of them should survive. He adds that he doesn't have much time left, and even if he's saved today, he won't live much longer. He reassures Jin not to feel bad about abandoning an injured man because he's just glad that Jin stayed to help when everyone else refused. The father's only regret is not being able to see his daughter's face one last time before he dies. Jin tells him to stop being sad about it and insists that since he is still alive, he should just stand up and go see his daughter. The father's face lights up at Jin's words, feeling a glimmer of hope even in this despairing situation. And that's where we'll pause for now. It's been quite a ride through this manhwa, and if you enjoyed it, I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Whether you're excited to continue this story or just want to share what you liked, let me know down in the comments.